Marcus Vale's hand was still wrapped around Ryan's collar when the sound happened. Not a crack, not a slam, just a single quiet click of a joint locking into place. And then Marcus was on the floor. He didn't know how he got there. That's the thing nobody tells you about men who've been to war. The dangerous ones don't look dangerous. They look tired. They look ordinary. They look like a guy in a stained work shirt who just wants to finish the job and get home to his kid. Ryan Cole looked like that. He wasn't. Drop a comment with your city. I want to see how far this story travels. And if nobody's told you lately, subscribe. You don't want to miss what happens next. The fluorescent light above Bay 3 had been flickering for 6 weeks. Ryan Cole had meant to fix it every single day for 6 weeks. He never got around to it because there was always something more important, a transmission that wouldn't shift a radiator that had boiled dry. A woman named Mrs. Kowalski, who paid him $40 to diagnose a check engine light that turned out to be a loose gas cap. He'd charged her $20, told her to have a good night, and watched her drive away feeling like maybe the world wasn't completely broken. That was Ryan's life. Small repairs, small moments. Nothing heroic about it. The flickering light didn't bother him anymore. He'd learned to work beneath it the same way he'd once learned to work in complete darkness by patience, by trusting his hands to know what his eyes couldn't see. How was 40 years old, and his back hurt in the morning, and his right shoulder had a way of locking up when the weather changed, that reminded him every single time of a night in a country he wasn't allowed to name in polite conversation. He'd been shot, not the movie kind of shot, where you press your hand to your side and keep running. The real kind. The kind where someone has to pack the wound with gauze and tell you to breathe slow, and you wonder very calmly whether this is the last thing you're going to see. He hadn't died that night. He'd retired 3 years later quietly with a handshake and a folder full of documents he was told never to discuss. Now he fixed cars in Hargrove, Texas. Population 11,000. 2 stoplights. 1 decent diner. 1 hardware store. 1 elementary school where his daughter Emma sat in Mrs. Patterson's 3rd grade class and drew pictures of him with a wrench in his hand and a smile that he always thought was more generous than the truth. Emma had his eyes. She had her mother's laugh. She had a birthday coming up in 6 weeks, and Ryan had been setting aside money. 20 here, 40 there, because the one thing she'd asked for, the one thing she'd taped a picture of to the refrigerator with a magnet shaped like a sunflower, was a laptop computer. For school, she'd explained very seriously. For school, Dad. Not games. Okay, maybe some games, but mostly school. He'd told her he'd figure it out. He hadn't figured it out yet, which was why on a Thursday evening in October, when the temperature had dropped into the low 50s, and his shop should have been closed, and he should have been home making spaghetti. Ryan Cole was instead lying on his back underneath a 2003 Ford F-150 pickup truck owned by a man named Gerald Hutchins, who had a transmission that was about to die on the highway if someone didn't intervene tonight. He had a flashlight between his teeth. His hands were black with grease to the wrists. The radio on his workbench was playing an old Merle Haggard song at low volume, just enough to fill the silence. He was thinking about nothing except the bolt he was trying to free, a corroded, stubborn, almost stripped bolt that had been in this chassis for 20 years and had no interest in moving when his phone buzzed in his shirt pocket. He ignored it. It buzzed again. He set down the wrench, pulled the phone out, and looked at the screen without lifting his head from the creeper. Unknown number. Texas area code. He let it go to voicemail. 30 seconds later, a text. This is Ethan Brooks. I run the Peak Performance Martial Arts Center on Route 7. I got your number from Gerald Hutchins. I have an emergency heating system is completely down. Big tournament Saturday. I have 30 kids coming in from 4 counties. If you can get it running tonight, I'll pay you $300 in cash. Please call me back. Ryan read it twice. $300. He closed his eyes for a moment. The bolt could wait. Gerald's transmission could wait. Emma's face when she opened that laptop box could not wait forever. He typed back, "Give me 45 minutes." The Peak Performance Martial Arts Center was a converted industrial building at the north end of Route 7, about a mile past the grain elevator and a quarter mile before the highway ramp. From the outside, it looked like exactly what it used to be, a warehouse, except for the vinyl banner above the entrance that showed a silhouette of a person mid-kick and the words, discipline, respect, excellence, in red block letters. Ryan pulled into the gravel lot at 8:47 p.m. There were two other vehicles in the lot. A newer black Dodge Ram 1500 lifted chrome wheels, the kind of truck that had never hauled anything heavier than its owner's ego, and a mud-caked Toyota Camry that Ryan assumed belonged to Brooks. He sat for a moment with the engine idling. The shoulder was bothering him tonight. It did that sometimes, not a sharp pain, more like a deep warning ache that his old unit's medic had once described with no particular bedside manner as, your body's way of telling you it remembers what happened, even when your brain tries to forget. Ryan reached over, rolled his shoulder twice, felt the familiar catch and release, and got out of the truck. He grabbed his toolbox from the bed. Green canvas bag beat to hell covered in faded stickers from hardware stores in 3 different states. He'd had it for 12 years. He'd carried it on base, brought it home, used it for a decade of odd jobs and personal repairs before opening the shop. Emma had drawn a smiley face on the side of it with a Sharpie when she was 4 years old. He'd never covered it up. He walked to the side entrance, the one Brooks had texted him about, and tried the handle. Open. He stepped inside. The main floor of the training center was big, 40 feet wide, maybe 60 deep, with padded flooring throughout, and heavy bags hanging in one corner. The walls were lined with mirrors. Trophies and plaques covered a long shelf along the back wall. Fluorescent lighting overhead, but not the flickering kind. These were new industrial, the kind of lights that showed everything. The problem was immediately obvious to Ryan. The thermostat on the wall read 48 degrees. He could see his breath. The heating unit, a commercial forced air system mounted near the ceiling at the far end, was completely silent. He crossed the floor, set his toolbox down near the base of the access ladder, and had just started to climb when he heard voices from the back hallway. 2 of them. Loud. The kind of loud that's designed to be heard. I'm telling you, the guy's got no idea what he's doing. Brooks is calling in some neighborhood handyman to fix a commercial HVAC unit. That's like bringing a busboy to perform surgery. Laughter. Low mean the kind meant to land. Maybe he'll figure it out. Give him a mop to clean up after himself when he can't. More laughter. Ryan didn't stop climbing. He reached the access panel, opened it with a flathead, and started working. The 2 men came around the corner a minute later. Marcus Vale was first. 6'2", 230 pounds of muscle layered over a frame that clearly spent significant time in a gym. He was wearing a black GI top over athletic shorts, and his thick neck had the look of someone who'd spent years doing neck bridge exercises. He moved across the training floor with the particular swagger of a man who'd spent his entire adult life being the most physically imposing person in most rooms. Beside him, Derek Vale, his younger brother by 2 years, was slightly shorter and leaner, with fast eyes that moved around a room the way animals' eyes move, always checking angles, always calculating. He had a gold chain around his neck that caught the light when he moved, and he wore his dark hair trimmed close to the sides. Both of them had black belts. Both of them had tournament records on that wall. Both of them had a way of taking up space that told you they expected the space to make room for them. Marcus noticed Ryan first. He stopped in the middle of the floor, arms crossed, and looked up at the man on the ladder, the way a man looks at something he considers beneath comment. Hey. No courtesy in the word. What are you doing up there? Ryan didn't look down. His hands were inside the access panel, feeling along the gas valve assembly. Heating unit. I can see that. I'm asking who told you to go touching that. Brooks. A pause. Brooks isn't here right now, Marcus said. He'll be back. Ryan found the issue a thermal limit switch that had tripped, probably from a blocked filter that had caused the unit to overheat and shut down as a safety measure. He reached for his bag. You didn't introduce yourself, Derek said from across the room. He'd moved without Ryan noticing, drifting to the right while Marcus held center. Not aggressive yet, just positioning. Ryan Cole. He pulled a multimeter from the bag. Hargrove Auto and Repair. A mechanic, Marcus said, and the word came out the way some people say janitor or busboy, not with contempt exactly, but with the specific flatness of someone who believes those things, and that person exists in a category below them, and always will. Brooks called a car mechanic to fix an HVAC system. HVAC car, same principle, Ryan said. Combustion airflow mechanical failure. I'll have it running in 20 minutes. That's adorable. Marcus uncrossed his arms. You always this confident about things you're not qualified for. Ryan clipped the multimeter leads to the thermal switch terminals. Read the resistance. The switch was open when it should have been closed. Confirmed tripped limit switch filter blockage. Let me ask you something, Marcus said. He took a step toward the base of the ladder. You know what this place is? Martial arts gym. Championship martial arts gym. Derek and I have been training here 6 years. Between us, we've got 3 regional titles. My brother holds the state record for fastest submission at the amateur level. You understand what that means? Ryan pulled the filter housing open. The filter was solid black, completely clogged, hadn't been changed in probably 2 years. He extracted it carefully, set it aside, began checking whether the thermal limit switch could be reset or needed replacement. It means you're both very good at what you do, Ryan said. It means we're very good at everything we do, Marcus replied, including knowing when someone doesn't belong somewhere. Ryan tested the reset button on the limit switch. It clicked. He checked the reading again, closed, now resistance near 0. Good. The switch was resettable. The motor was probably still functional. He'd need to run a test cycle before confirming, but this was looking like a $45 repair and a new filter, not a replacement unit. He started climbing back down. When he reached the floor, he turned around and found Marcus Vale standing 8 feet away, watching him with an expression that Ryan had seen before on men who wanted to establish something, who needed to establish it, who couldn't let a situation exist without asserting their position in it. Ryan had met a lot of men like Marcus Vale over the years. Some of them had been in uniform. Some of them had been in suits. Some of them had been in places where they were the only thing standing between a village of civilians and a very bad situation. None of them had impressed him. He bent down, opened his toolbox, and started looking for a replacement filter. He had a couple of standard sizes in the truck. He'd check if one matched before making a run to the hardware store. You got a hearing problem, Marcus said. He took another step closer. No. Ryan straightened with a filter in his hand, checked the size against the housing. Too big. He set it aside, reached for the next one. Then you heard me when I said you don't belong here. And I heard me when I said I'll have this running in 20 minutes. Ryan checked the second filter. Perfect fit. He began walking back toward the ladder with it. Marcus moved to intercept him. Not violently, not yet, just stepped into his path in a way that required Ryan to stop or walk into him. Ryan stopped. He looked at Marcus. Really looked at him, not the way most people look at someone when they're afraid, scanning for exits or calculating what to say, but the way a person looks at something they're genuinely trying to understand. Still. Patient. Almost curious. Something about that stillness made Marcus pause. What? Marcus said. You want something from me, Ryan said. I'm trying to figure out what it is. I want you to show some respect. You walked into our space, you started touching our equipment without asking us. It's Brooks's equipment. And you haven't said one word that shows you understand where you are. Ryan considered this. Then he said very simply, I understand exactly where I am. I'm standing in a cold building with a broken heater. I have a replacement filter in my hand. In 20 minutes it won't be cold anymore, and Brooks will have his gym ready for Saturday. He paused. That's where I am. He took a step to the left to go around Marcus. Marcus stepped with him. You think this is funny, Marcus said, and now the flatness in his voice was starting to harden into something else. You think we're a joke. I don't think anything about you, Ryan said. I'm trying to fix a heater. That landed wrong. Not because it was meant as an insult. Ryan had meant it as a plain statement of fact, the most neutral thing he could have said, but because to a man like Marcus Vale being thought about nothing was worse than being thought of badly. Indifference from someone you've decided is beneath you is the one thing you cannot absorb. It implies that you're not as important as you believe yourself to be. It implies that your presence, your size, your reputation, your whole identity, none of it registers to this man in a stained work shirt. Marcus's jaw tightened. Derek, still moving around the edges of the room in that casual circling way, had drifted to Ryan's left flank without making it look intentional. Ryan was aware of it. He'd been aware of it since the first minute. Old habits. "Let me explain something to you," Marcus said, his voice dropping lower now, which was often more dangerous than when it went louder. "I've put 3 men on the ground in this gym. Trained fighters. Guys with records. I've done it in under 2 minutes, and I did it without breaking a sweat. Now I don't know who you are, or where you came from, or what you think gives you the right to stand here and look at me like I'm nothing. But I'm going to need you to adjust your attitude before this conversation goes somewhere you don't want it to go." Silence. The kind of silence that has weight in it. Ryan looked at Marcus for a long moment. Then he looked at the filter in his hand. Then he looked back. "I'm going to tell you something," Ryan said quietly. "And I want you to take it seriously. Not as a challenge. Not as a threat. Just as information." Marcus waited. "Walk away," Ryan said. "Go somewhere else in the building for 20 minutes. Let me fix the heater. I'll be gone before 9:30, and you'll never have to think about me again." It was the most reasonable offer anyone had ever made Marcus Vale, and he rejected it in about 4 seconds. "Or what?" he said. Ryan exhaled slowly through his nose. "Or what?" Marcus said again, louder this time, taking a half step forward. "You gonna threaten me, you, with your busted-up tool bag and your grease-stained hands? You gonna tell me what's gonna happen if I don't move?" Ryan set the filter down on top of his toolbox very carefully. He straightened up. He looked at Marcus. And he said one more time in a voice that hadn't changed in pitch or temperature at all, "I warned you." Marcus laughed. He turned to look at Derek. "You hearing this guy?" And in that half second of looking away, something shifted in the room. Not visibly. Not in any way Marcus could have identified. But if you'd been watching carefully, you might have noticed that Ryan Cole's weight had distributed differently. That his hands, which had been loose at his sides, had changed position in a way that was neither aggressive nor careless. That his feet, without appearing to move, had found new placement on the padded floor. Nothing happened yet. Marcus turned back. "Warned me," he said. "Man, you are something else. Derek, you hearing this?" "Heard it," Derek said. He was 6 feet away on Ryan's left, now no longer drifting. Stopped. Positioned. Ryan didn't turn to look at him. He didn't need to. "You know what your problem is," Marcus said, stepping closer now inside what most people would consider comfortable personal space. "The distance men use when they want to make you feel small without technically touching you. You got no idea what you walked into. You think because you can turn a wrench you're tough. You think because you do a little manual labor you know something about being hard. But hard isn't something you learn under a car, brother. Hard is something you earn." I was close enough now that Ryan could smell the protein shake on his breath. "Last chance," Ryan said. Marcus reached out and put 2 fingers against Ryan's chest and pushed. It was meant to move him. Make him stumble back. Create distance. Establish dominance in the physical language of men who use bodies as arguments. Ryan didn't move. Not a millimeter. Marcus blinked. He pushed again, harder this time with his full palm instead of 2 fingers. Not a punch, but the kind of hard shove that sends most men backward a step. Ryan took it the way a telephone pole takes a shove. Something changed in Marcus's eyes. Not fear, not yet. But something. An early half-formed signal. Static on a frequency he hadn't been monitoring. "What are you?" Derek came in from the left. Fast. Low. Aiming for Ryan's arm, intending to grab and pull, unbalance him, create an opening. And Ryan moved. Not away, not back. He rotated a small, precise movement, barely 6 inches of travel, and Derek's grip found nothing. In the same motion, something happened to Derek's wrist. The physics of it were simple. The execution was not. Derek felt his entire arm turned against itself, felt the joint reach its limit, and the tendons scream, and then he was down on one knee on the mat, not because anyone had hit him, but because the alternative, staying standing, meant something would break. "Hey," Derek started. Marcus came in hard. He threw a proper strike this time, a right cross clean technique, the kind that had ended amateur bouts in under 60 seconds. It was a genuinely good punch from a genuinely trained fighter, and Marcus had every reason to believe it would end the discussion. It didn't land. Ryan slipped it inside the arc, not outside, the kind of slip that most people don't know exists, and countered not with a punch, but with an open palm redirect that turned Marcus's momentum against him, sending his own mass forward and down in a way his body couldn't correct for. Marcus hit the mat face first, caught himself on his forearms, and was trying to push up when a knee came to rest in the center of his back, with exactly enough pressure to communicate one thing: stay. The room was silent. Derek was still on one knee, cradling his wrist, looking at his brother on the floor, trying to understand what had just happened. Marcus was breathing hard, his cheek against the padded mat, his arms unable to find useful purchase. Ryan held that position for 3 seconds. Then he stood, stepped back, and reached down to pick up the replacement filter from where he'd set it on the toolbox. "I'm going to go fix the heater now," he said, in exactly the same voice he'd been using for the past 10 minutes. "When I come back down, I'd appreciate some room." Marcus turned his head on the mat to look up at him. His expression had changed completely. The swagger was gone. Not replaced by fear, though fear was there, but by something more complicated than that. Something that happens to men who have built their entire identity on being the most dangerous person in a given space, and have then encountered without warning a space they don't fill. "Who?" He stopped, started again. "Who are you?" Ryan's foot was already on the first rung of the ladder. "I'm the guy fixing your heater," he said, and climbed. It took 18 minutes, not 20. Ryan had been optimistic by 2 minutes. He reset the thermal limit switch, installed the new filter, checked the flue for blockage. There was a partial one. He cleared it in 4 minutes with the brush from his bag, restored power to the unit, and ran a full test cycle while he packed up his tools. The heater came on with a low mechanical hum and the rush of forced air through newly unobstructed ducts. By the time Ryan's feet hit the floor, the thermostat already showed 52 degrees and climbing. Marcus Vale was sitting on a bench against the wall, his elbows on his knees, his head down. He hadn't spoken in 18 minutes. Derek stood near the door to the hallway, his wrist wrapped in a stretch bandage he'd gotten from somewhere, a first aid kit on the wall probably, and he watched Ryan pack his tools, the way you watch something that doesn't follow the rules you thought were permanent. Ryan zipped his bag, lifted it, and started toward the main entrance. Wait. It was Derek. Ryan stopped but didn't turn around immediately. When he did, Derek's eyes were different from before. The calculating animal wariness was still there, but there was something underneath it now. Something that looked around the edges, almost like respect. "How did you—" Derek started, then stopped. Tried again. "That thing you did with my arm. I've trained for 6 years. I've worked with 3 different coaches. I've never seen anyone move like—" He shook his head. "Who trained you?" Ryan looked at him for a long moment. "The United States government," he said. The silence that followed had a different texture than the silence before. Marcus lifted his head. Derek went very still. Ryan picked up his toolbox and walked to the door. He had his hand on the push bar when Marcus spoke. "I thought—" His voice was quieter now, stripped of performance. This was what was underneath a man who'd built a castle on sand and was watching the tide come in. "I thought you were just—" "I know what you thought," Ryan said. He pushed the door open. The night air came in cold and clean, and he stepped out into the gravel parking lot and walked to his truck and put his toolbox in the back without any hurry. He sat behind the wheel for a moment. His shoulder was aching again. The incident hadn't helped. He rolled it slowly, felt the catch-and-release thought of the medic, thought of a night he'd spent 11 hours in an overwatch position in terrain. He couldn't describe, couldn't name, with a rifle he'd cleaned 4 times out of pure nervous energy, waiting for a signal that almost didn't come. He'd been younger then, lighter in some ways, heavier in others. He started the truck and pulled out of the gravel lot onto Route 7. In his rearview mirror, the vinyl banner over the entrance to the Peak Performance Martial Arts Center caught his headlights for a moment. Discipline, respect, excellence. He thought about Emma. He thought about whether the hardware store on Route 4 would still be open because he'd used his last 1-inch replacement filter on the Brooks unit, and he liked to have 2 in the truck. He thought about spaghetti. He pulled his phone out at the next stoplight and texted Ethan Brooks. "Heater is running. Replace the air filter and reset the thermal limit switch. You'll want to put filter changes on a quarterly schedule. That's what tripped the shutdown. 300 is more than fair, but 65 is what the job was worth. Venmo me whatever you think is right." Brooks replied 4 minutes later, while Ryan was at the second and final stoplight in Hargrove. "You earned every dollar. Thank you. And I'm sorry about whatever happened in there. I'll handle it." Ryan put the phone in his cup holder. He turned onto Elm Street. Turned again onto Birch. He pulled into the driveway of a small yellow house with a porch light on. The porch light was always on. Emma left it on for him every night, even when she was asleep, because she had decided at the age of 4, with the ironclad logic of a child who has worked something out, that a house with the light off couldn't be a house that anyone was coming home to, and she wanted to make sure her father always had a house that he was coming home to. She'd been 4 when she decided that. He'd never told her it meant the world to him. He got out of the truck. He rolled his shoulder one more time in the cold air. He walked up the porch steps, unlocked the door, and stepped into the warmth. The living room was lit by the small lamp on the side table. Emma's other rule that the lamp stayed on because the overhead light was too much when you were trying to sleep, but darkness was too much when you were waiting for someone. He had no idea how she'd arrived at this philosophy. She had many philosophies. He wrote them down sometimes in a small notebook he kept in the truck. He set his keys on the hook by the door. He took off his boots. I was walking past the kitchen table when he stopped. There was something on it. A piece of paper. White, slightly wrinkled from being pressed flat after being folded in half. Crayons spread around it in the chaotic aftermath of someone who'd worked hard and then abandoned the workspace immediately upon completion. He picked it up. It was a drawing. Emma's drawings had a quality that he couldn't describe to anyone who hadn't seen them. Not technically skilled, not unusual for a 9-year-old, but specific. Every figure she drew was doing something. Not standing, not posing. Doing something. In this one, a man in blue pants and a brown shirt stood next to a large vehicle. He could tell it was his truck because she'd given it 4 wheels and a toolbox in the back, which was how she always drew his truck, and the man was reaching under the vehicle with one arm while standing upright, which was not anatomically how repairs worked, but was clearly intended to convey fixing. Above the man's head, in her careful, deliberate 3rd-grade handwriting, "Dad fixes everything." Ryan stood in his kitchen at 9:47 p.m. on a Thursday in October, holding a drawing done in crayon by a 9-year-old girl who didn't know who her father had been and felt something that had no name he'd ever found that fit it. Not pride. Pride was too simple. Not grief. It wasn't sad. It was something that existed in the space between who he'd been and who he was now, and it felt more than anything else like the answer to a question he'd been afraid to ask. He set the drawing on the counter where he could see it. He went to check on Emma. She was asleep on her side with her arm around a stuffed rabbit that she'd owned since she was 2, and that now looked like it had been through something. Her breathing was slow and even, and her face in the faint light from the hall had the specific peace of a child who has never once, not for a single moment, doubted that the person who was supposed to come home tonight would come home tonight. Ryan stood in the doorway. He did this some nights, just stood there. Not watching her sleep in a strange way, but in the way of a man who needs to remember why he does the things he does, who he does them for. I thought about Marcus Vail and Derek Vail and their tournament records and their swagger and the particular loneliness of men who had built their identity on dominance and then found without warning that dominance was the loneliest thing in the world when the person across from you doesn't flinch. He thought about the 18-minute repair, the filter, the switch, the flu. He thought about how he'd driven 22 miles round trip for $65. He thought about the laptop picture on the refrigerator. He thought about a lot of things standing there in his daughter's doorway, and then he stopped thinking about them because none of it was as important as this: the breathing, the rabbit, the peace on that small face. He pulled the door mostly closed and went to the kitchen and heated up the leftover soup from 2 nights ago and sat at the table and ate it and looked at the drawing. Dad fixes everything. He didn't. Nobody did. But he was going to keep trying for as long as he had the hands for it. That was enough. That had always been enough. He just hadn't always known it. End of part 1. The soup was cold by the time Ryan finished it. I hadn't noticed. He'd been sitting at the kitchen table for 40 minutes eating without tasting, staring at the drawing Emma had left him, thinking about nothing and everything at the same time. That was a skill he'd developed over years. The ability to let his mind run wide open, while his face stayed completely still. His old team leader, a man named Carver, who'd grown up in rural Georgia and never used 2 words when one would do, had called it going quiet. Most of the guys did it. You had to. Otherwise, the gap between what you saw in the field and what you came home to, the drawings, the soup, the porch lights, would swallow you whole. Ryan pushed the bowl aside and rubbed his face with both hands. His shoulder had settled into a dull, constant throb. Not sharp. Just present, the way old injuries always were, not screaming, just reminding. He'd take 2 ibuprofen before bed, and it would be manageable by morning. He knew his body's rhythms the way a mechanic knows an engine he's rebuilt 3 times. Every sound, every hesitation, every warning signal. He sat for another minute, then got up, washed the bowl, dried it, and put it away. I did the things you do when you live alone with a child, and the night is quiet, and you need your hands occupied so your head doesn't get too loud. He wiped down the counter. He checked that the back door was locked. He looked at the refrigerator. The laptop picture was still there, held up by the sunflower magnet, and did rough math in his head. 300 from Brooks, minus the 65, he'd told him to pay instead, because Ryan had never been able to overcharge anyone for a job, and he wasn't starting now. Gerald Hutchins still owed him 140 for the transmission diagnostic, which Gerald would pay, because Gerald was good for it, just slow. 2 other jobs on the board for next week. A brake job on a Silverado, and an oil change and tire rotation for the Kowalski woman, who he suspected would start coming in regularly, now that she knew someone would charge her honestly. It wasn't enough. Not yet. But it was getting there. He turned off the kitchen light and went to bed. He lay in the dark for a while, not sleeping, doing the other thing he did, running through the evening, the way you run through a debrief, clean and methodical, not to torture himself, but to understand. Marcus and Derek Vale. Their body language, their positioning, the way Derek had drifted to the left without making it look deliberate. They were trained, not untrained, not pretenders. Whatever their character flaws, they'd put in real hours on that mat, and they had real skill. They just had no idea what real skill looked like from the outside. That was the thing nobody ever told you about the highest levels of any discipline. When you got there, truly got there, it stopped looking like anything. It looked like a middle-aged man standing still while someone shoved him. It looked like nothing happening until suddenly everything happened, and it was already over. He'd tried to give them an out. He'd meant what he said. He wasn't angry, hadn't been angry for a single second. You didn't get angry at a situation like that. You managed it. You de-escalated, you offered exits, you kept the window open as long as you possibly could. He'd kept it open longer than most men would have, and they'd walked through it in the wrong direction, and that was their choice, and they'd live with whatever came after. He hoped they'd think about it. He fell asleep at 11:14. He woke up at 5:42, which was when he always woke up, because 17 years of military routine had set something in his body that no amount of civilian life had managed to reset. He lay still for exactly 90 seconds. Another old habit, the combat version of the snooze button, where you assessed before you moved, and then he got up, put on coffee, and started Emma's lunch. Peanut butter and honey on wheat. Apple slices. A juice box. A small note folded into a triangle that he tucked under the apple slices, because he'd been doing that since her first day of kindergarten, and he wasn't going to stop now. He didn't write anything elaborate on the notes. Usually just something simple. Today, you're going to do great. I love you. Dad. He didn't even have to think about it anymore. His hand just wrote it. He poured the first cup of coffee and drank it standing at the counter, looking out the window at the backyard in the early gray light. And that was when his phone rang. Not a text. A call. Before 6 in the morning. He looked at the screen. Ethan Brooks. He answered. Mr. Cole. Brooks's voice was different from the text messages, fuller, more careful. A man choosing words. I'm sorry to call this early. I wanted to catch you before your day started. It's fine, Ryan said. What's wrong with the heater? Nothing. The heater's fine. It ran all night buildings at 68. A pause. This is about something else. Ryan waited. I got in last night around 10, Brooks said. After you left, Marcus and Derek were still there. I could tell something had happened. Derek had his wrist wrapped. Marcus was sitting by himself, which is not something Marcus Vale does. He's not a sit-by-yourself kind of person. Another pause. I asked what happened. Marcus told me. Ryan set his coffee cup down. Mr. Cole, I owe you an apology. Those two men, I've been trying to manage their behavior for 2 years. They bring in revenue. They're good for the gym's reputation on the tournament circuit, and I keep telling myself that buys them some latitude. Last night showed me I've been wrong about how much latitude that is. His voice tightened. Whatever happened, whatever they said to you, that's not what this gym is. That's not what I built it to be. No permanent damage, Ryan said. Derek's wrist. Sprained, maybe. He should ice it. It'll be fine in a week. A long silence. Marcus said you moved like he stopped mid-sentence, and I don't think he knew how to finish it. Brooks said. He's been training since he was 19. He's competed against some very good fighters. He said he'd never... Brooks stopped. I'm not asking you to explain yourself. I just wanted you to know that I'm aware of what you showed in that gym last night, and it wasn't what you were paid to show, and I think it took a kind of restraint that most people don't have. Ryan picked up his coffee cup again. I just wanted to fix the heater, he said. Brooks made a sound, not quite a laugh, but something in that neighborhood. Yeah, Marcus said you said that. He cleared his throat. The 300 stands, by the way. I'll send the full amount. Don't argue with me about it. Ryan was about to argue, and then he thought about the laptop and the sunflower magnet and the note under the apple slices. Okay, he said. One more thing, Brooks said. And you can tell me to mind my own business. But I've been in the martial arts world for 30 years. I've seen a lot of people move. What you did last night. Derek's a good grappler. Marcus is fast. Most people, even trained people, wouldn't have seen Derek coming in from the side at that angle. You saw it before it started. He paused. That's not sport training. That's not even advanced sport training. Ryan said nothing. So, Brooks said, and there was something in his voice, respect maybe, or the particular carefulness of a man who suspects he's talking to someone with clearances. He doesn't have, I just wanted to say, whatever you did before you became a mechanic in Hargrove, Texas. Thank you for it. That's all. Ryan stood at his kitchen counter in the early gray morning, listening to a heater he'd fixed the night before, and the distant sound of a school bus running its route 2 streets over. Take care of those kids on Saturday, he said. They came a long way for the tournament. He hung up. He finished his coffee. At 6:15, Emma's alarm went off in her room, a sound like a small determined bird, and he heard her groan, heard the specific thump of her feet hitting the floor, heard the shuffle of her moving to the bathroom. He put bread in the toaster for her because she always wanted toast in the morning, and always forgot to make it until she was almost late. She came into the kitchen at 6:23 in her school clothes jeans and a green sweater with a small horse embroidered on the pocket, which she'd chosen herself at the start of the school year, and had worn approximately every third day since, with her hair still messy and her face still carrying the softness of sleep. She looked at him. You got home late, she said. I had a job. Was it a hard one? He thought about the thermal limit switch. He thought about Marcus Vale's face on the mat. He thought about the filter that hadn't been changed in 2 years. Not really, he said. Toast is coming. She climbed onto her chair and accepted this because she was 9, and mornings were serious business, and there was no time for unnecessary conversation. She ate her toast. She drank half a glass of orange juice. She checked her backpack twice in the way she always did, methodically, item by item, and then she looked up at him with the sudden focused intensity that meant she'd remembered something important. Maddie's mom is picking up from school on Friday, she said. We're going to Maddie's house. Is that still okay? That's still okay. She has a new dog. What kind? Emma considered this with appropriate gravity. Some kind of golden. Maddie said it ate a shoe last week, and they're not mad about it because it's still a puppy, and puppies get one free shoe. Ryan nodded. Sounds like a fair policy. She finished her juice and went to get her backpack, and came back and stood at the door with the expression she wore when she was about to say something that she'd been thinking about for a while. He could always tell. Her eyes went slightly to the left, and her mouth did a thing where it wasn't quite closed. "Dad," she said. "Yeah. I left you a drawing. I saw it. Did you like it?" He looked at her, this small, serious person in her horse sweater, with her backpack straps buckled precisely the way she always buckled them, looking at him across the kitchen with the particular vulnerability of someone who has made something and offered it to another person and now has to wait. "I liked it a lot," he said. She nodded, satisfied the way she nodded when things were confirmed rather than new. "I meant it to be true," she said. "Not just a picture, like an actual true thing." "I know." "Okay." She pushed open the door. "Bye, Dad." "Bye, Em." The door closed. Ryan stood in the kitchen for a moment in the quiet. Then he put her juice glass in the dishwasher and went to work. The shop opened at 7:30. Gerald Hutchins was there at 7:32, which was not a surprise because Gerald always showed up slightly after Ryan opened as a matter of courtesy. He was 61, had worked at the grain elevator for 30 years before his knees gave out, and he regarded punctuality as a form of respect and being slightly late as a form of not being presumptuous. Ryan had been fixing Gerald's vehicles for 2 years and had figured this out in the first 3 weeks. "Transmission," Gerald said, hands in his jacket pockets. "Transmission," Ryan confirmed, lifting the hood. "Come look at this." Gerald looked at the things Ryan showed him with the expression of a man who understood none of it but trusted the person explaining it, which was the best possible condition for a mechanic's customer. Ryan walked him through it without jargon in the same plain language he'd once used to brief people who needed information fast and clear, and Gerald nodded at the right moments and said, "Lord have mercy," twice, which was apparently his response to expensive automotive news. "How much?" Gerald said. Ryan told him. Gerald said, "Lord have mercy," a third time, which set a personal record. "I can do it in parts," Ryan said. "Fix the worst of it now, rest next month." Gerald thought about this. "What's the worst of it?" "The part where it fails on the highway and you're sitting on the shoulder waiting for a tow." "Yeah." Gerald blew out a breath. "Okay. Do the whole thing. Margaret'll survive." Margaret was Gerald's wife, and Ryan had the impression that she regularly survived things with dignity. "When can you have it?" "Monday." "Monday's good." Gerald shook his hand. "You're a good man, Ryan Cole." Ryan handed him a receipt and went back to the shop. The morning passed. The way. Mornings passed in tasks in the specific rhythm of physical work that he'd come to rely on, the way some people relied on meditation or religion. There was something about the logic of a machine. It didn't lie. It didn't perform. It either worked or it didn't. And if it didn't, there was a reason. And if you looked carefully enough, you found the reason, and then you fixed it. That was the whole negotiation. No ambiguity, no politics, no wondering about intentions. At 10:47, a car pulled up outside that he didn't recognize. A black Dodge Ram 1500, lifted. Chrome wheels. He was underneath Gerald's transmission, and he heard the tires on the gravel, and he went very still for a moment, the way he went still when something registered before his conscious mind had worked out what it was registering. Then he rolled out from under the vehicle on the creeper, sat up and looked. Marcus Vale got out of the truck alone. No Derek. He stood by the driver's door for a moment, looking at the shop, and Ryan could see even from this distance that something in his posture was different. The deliberate swagger was absent. He was standing the way a man stands when he's worked out what he needs to say, and is trying to remember the courage it took to decide to say it. Ryan wiped his hands on a shop rag and stood up. He walked to the bay door and stood there, not going out, not inviting Marcus in. Just standing in the threshold with his arms loose at his sides and his face neutral. Marcus walked across the gravel. He stopped 10 feet away. They looked at each other. "I wanted to come by," Marcus said. Then he stopped because what he'd rehearsed apparently sounded different inside his head than it did out here in the cold October morning light. Ryan waited. Derek's wrist is okay, Marcus said. He iced it. It's just sore. Good. Another pause. I wanted to... Marcus looked down at the gravel, then back up. He was a big man, and he looked slightly smaller right now, not physically, but in the way that people look smaller when they are forced to occupy a space that requires them to be something other than what they've performed their whole lives. I wanted to come and say that I was wrong last night. What I did, what we did that wasn't right. And I think I knew it while it was happening, and I did it anyway, and I'm not... He stopped. Tried a different angle. I'm not going to make excuses about it. I was wrong. Ryan said nothing. Marcus's jaw worked slightly. You could have put both of us down hard. Whatever you did to Derek, that wrist hold or whatever that was, you could have snapped it. You didn't. And you could have hit me while I was down, and you didn't do that either. And I want to know why. He paused. I'm not challenging you. Why? Ryan looked at him for a long moment. Because there was no reason to, Ryan said finally. That's it. That's it. Marcus absorbed this. Most people in your position would have been angrier. I wasn't angry. At all. I was trying to fix a heater. Something crossed Marcus's face, not quite shame, but something adjacent, something that lived in the same neighborhood. He looked out at Route 7 for a moment, at the passing cars, the ordinary Thursday morning traffic of a small Texas town going about its business. Who were you? He said. Not who are you. Past tense. He'd worked that out. Ryan looked at him. A soldier, he said. What kind? Ryan tilted his head very slightly to one side. The expression on his face was not unfriendly, but it answered the question. Okay, Marcus said quietly. Okay. He looked down at the gravel again. When he looked back up, there was something raw in his face, something that had been stripped of the coating that protected it. I've been the biggest, strongest person in the room my whole life. I'm not, I know how that sounds. But it's just true. And I built everything on that. Everything I think about myself. Everything the gym, the tournaments, the way I walk into a space. It's all built on being the person nobody messes with. He stopped. And then last night, he said, you just... He shook his head. It wasn't even that you could have destroyed me. It's that you didn't care. Like it wasn't even a decision you had to make. Like you looked at me and just didn't register me as a threat. Do you know what that does to a person? Ryan considered the question honestly. Yeah, he said. I know exactly what that does. Marcus looked at him for a long time. I'm sorry, he said, for what we did, and what we said. That was wrong. He reached into his jacket and held out an envelope. Brooks told me to bring this. It's the 300. He said you'd try to give some back, and he said to tell you he won't accept it. Ryan looked at the envelope. He thought about Emma's lunch packed and already at school. He thought about the laptop picture on the refrigerator. He took the envelope. I accept your apology, he said. Marcus nodded once quickly, like a man getting something over with that he's been building himself up to. He started to turn back toward his truck. Veil, Ryan said. Marcus stopped. You've got real skill, Ryan said. Both of you. Don't waste it on proving things to people who aren't worth proving them to. Marcus stood there with his back half turned, not quite looking at Ryan, not quite looking away. Is that what you did? He asked. When you were before. Ryan thought about that. About the things he'd proven, and to whom, and at what cost. About the men he'd served with, and the ones he'd lost, and the ones who'd come home different, and the ones who hadn't come home. About a night in a tree, he couldn't name a wound that had taken 7 months to heal a shoulder that still remembered. I proved things to myself, Ryan said. Took me a long time to figure out that was the only one who mattered. Marcus turned and walked back to his truck. He drove out of the gravel lot onto Route 7 without looking back. Ryan stood in the bay door for a moment, watching the truck disappear in the direction of town. Then he went back to Gerald Hutchins' transmission. The work was waiting. The work was always waiting. And there was something he'd always loved about that, The way a task held its ground, patient and honest, ready for you to come back to it when the rest of life had said what it needed to say. He slid back under the vehicle. The music from the radio drifted under with him. His hands found where they'd left off. He got back to it. But inside his chest, something that had been sitting with low-grade weight since last night. Not guilt, not regret. Something more complicated than either had shifted very slightly toward quiet. He didn't examine it. He just let it settle. And worked. At 2:17 in the afternoon, he got a second call he wasn't expecting. Not from Brooks this time. Not from Gerald. The screen showed a number he hadn't seen in 3 years, and below it, a name that came with its own weight, its own history, its own particular set of memories that he kept in a folder he rarely opened. He stared at the screen through 2 full rings. Then he answered. "Carver," he said. "Cole." The voice was exactly the same as he remembered, flat, economical, the Georgia cadence running underneath it like a current beneath still water. "You sitting down?" "I'm under a truck. Get out from under the truck." Ryan set down the wrench. He rolled out from under the vehicle on the creeper, sat up, looked at the light through the bay door. "Okay," he said. "I'm out." "I'm going to ask you something," Carver said. "And I need you to hear the whole question before you answer." Ryan was already feeling it, the particular frequency shift that happened when a conversation stopped being ordinary. He'd felt it before. It never meant simple things. "Ask," he said. 3 months ago, a man named Victor Raines walked out of a federal correction facility in Arizona. You might remember that name. Ryan's hand tightened slightly on the phone. He remembered the name. He remembered it the way you remember things that were important enough to change the shape of a year. "I remember," he said. "There's some concern," Carver said, choosing every word with the precision of a man who had done this a long time, "that his release was not entirely without purpose. That there are people who arranged it, and that those people have some unfinished interest in some members of our old unit." The bay door was still open. The light was still October flat and cold. A pickup truck went past on Route 7, an ordinary truck going somewhere ordinary. Ryan watched it go. "How specific is the concern?" he said. "Specific enough that I'm making phone calls I haven't made in 3 years, Carver said. "Cole, you've got a daughter." "I know I've got a daughter. I'm saying that's a factor, in the calculation. I'm saying that's information you need to have, and I want you to have it now before this gets more defined." The quiet of the shop was suddenly a different kind of quiet than it had been 60 seconds ago. Ryan sat on the creeper in the middle of Bay 3, under the flickering light he'd meant to fix for 6 weeks, and he felt the world he'd built in Hargrove, Texas. The soup, the porch light, the sunflower magnet, the note under the apple slices become suddenly acutely fragile, in a way it had not been this morning. "When?" he said. "I don't know yet. That's the honest answer." "What do you need from me?" "Right now, nothing. Stay aware. Stay reachable." A pause. "And Cole?" "Yeah. Don't let your guard down. Not even here. Especially not here." Ryan exhaled slowly. Carver, he said. "Why now, why him? 3 years is a long time." "Because," Carver said, and there was something in his voice, the specific weight of a man who knows more than he's saying and is calibrating how much the truth costs. "The mission we ran in November of 19, the one with the facility. Someone on the outside has been asking very careful questions about what happened in that facility, and the answers to those questions are worth a very large amount of money to some very specific people." Ryan closed his eyes. November of 19. He hadn't thought about that in a year. He'd told himself he'd stopped thinking about it. "Okay," he said. "Stay reachable," Carver said again. "I'll call when I know more." The line went dead. Ryan sat on the creeper in the empty shop and let the silence grow back around him like a tide coming back in after something had disturbed it. From the radio, low and patient Merle Haggard was still playing. Ryan put the phone in his chest pocket. He picked up the wrench. He slid back under the truck. But his mind was already somewhere else in November of 19, in a facility he'd spent 3 years trying to forget, in a mission that had cost 2 members of his unit things, They'd never fully recovered in the face of a man named Victor Rains, who had looked at him across a room after everything was over and said with absolute cold certainty, "I remember faces." Ryan had believed him then. He believed him now. He worked until 5 o'clock. Then he locked the shop, drove home, put on the porch light, and started making dinner. Spaghetti, because he'd promised himself he would, and he kept his promises. Emma came home at 5:40, full of news about the new dog and a test she thought she'd done well on, and something complicated involving Maddie and another girl named Sophia that he listened to with full attention and understood approximately 40% of which was, he'd found exactly the right amount to follow the essential emotional arc without getting lost in the details. She helped him stir the sauce. She set the table without being asked, which happened maybe twice a month and was always worth noting. They ate together at the kitchen table, under the overhead light, that Emma had once decreed was too much, but had apparently revised her position on since, and he watched her talk and eat and wave her fork around when she was making a point she felt strongly about, and he thought about Carver's voice on the phone, and Victor Rains's face, and November of 19. And he smiled at the right moments, and he asked the right questions. And when she showed him the grade she'd gotten on her science test 94, which she held up with the specific pride of someone who had worked for it and knew it, he said, "I knew it," the way he always said it, because he always did know it, because Emma worked at things until they worked, which was her father's quality and her mother's stubbornness, and some third thing that was entirely her own. After dinner, she did homework at the table while he washed dishes, and the house was quiet and ordinary and warm. And Ryan Cole, who had once done things in places he could not name, for reasons he could not explain, who had come home and built a small, careful life around a 9-year-old girl and a truck and a flickering light he kept meaning to fix, stood at his kitchen sink and washed a pot and thought about what it cost to keep something safe. He'd paid that price before. How was willing to pay it again. Whatever it cost. Whatever came next. He slept 4 hours that night. Not because he couldn't sleep. Ryan had trained himself to sleep in places that made 4 hours feel luxurious, but because at 2 in the morning, his mind made a decision. His body hadn't been consulted on, and he was sitting up in the dark before he'd fully realized he was awake. Victor Rains. He hadn't said the name out loud in 3 years. Hadn't let himself think it for most of that time, and on the occasions when it surfaced anyway, the way certain things surface unbidden at 3 in the morning, when the house is quiet and there's nothing between you and the truth. He'd learned to let it pass through without grabbing onto it, like a current in water. You let it move, and you didn't swim against it, and eventually it carried itself somewhere else. But Carver's call had changed the physics of that. Because Carver didn't make phone calls like that for background noise. Carver made those calls when the information was load-bearing. When not having it would cost you something you couldn't afford to lose. Ryan sat on the edge of his bed in the dark and went back to November of 19. Not the parts he'd spent years filing away. The part that mattered now. The part where Victor Rains' hands zip-tied behind his back, blood on his temple from a doorframe he'd met too quickly in the dark, had looked up at Ryan from the floor of that facility with eyes that were absolutely, completely calm. Not the calm of someone who had surrendered. The calm of someone who had already calculated the next several moves and found them acceptable. And he'd said, "I remember faces." That was all. 3 words. And then he'd let himself be processed without another word cooperating fully, answering every question from debrief with the patient, organized precision of a man who had decided that compliance was at that moment the most efficient strategy available to him. Ryan had told himself at the time that it was a bluff, that men in zip ties said things to make themselves feel larger in a moment that made them small. He'd half believed it then. I didn't believe it at all now. He got up at 2:14, went to the kitchen, poured water, stood at the window. The street outside was empty and still. A dog barked 3 houses down, the brief territorial announcement of a dog that had heard something and wanted the neighborhood to know it was on duty. Then silence again. He thought about Emma asleep in the next room. He thought about what the word specific meant coming from Carver. Carver had said specific enough that I'm making phone calls I haven't made in 3 years. Carver made things less dramatic than they were always as a default setting. He was a man who described a firefight as busy and a bad injury as significant. So specific enough to be calling translated in Carver's language into something Ryan didn't want to name directly, but couldn't stop naming in the back of his head. He went back to bed at 2:40. He lay there with his eyes open until 4, and then something in him made a decision. A practical, methodical decision, the kind his mind made when it stopped arguing with itself and started working, and he felt his body release, and he slept. He was up at 5:42 on the dot. Haimata coffee. He made Emma's lunch. He wrote the note today. It said, "I'm proud of you. I love you, Dad," because he felt the need to say something with a little more weight in it and folded it under the apple slices. When Emma came down at 6:20, she was wearing the horse sweater again, and her hair was in the ponytail. She'd been doing herself for a year, slightly off-center, the way it always was, and she looked at him across the kitchen with the particular assessment of a 9-year-old who reads her parents' face the way some children read weather. "You look tired," she said. "I'm fine." "You have that look." "What look?" She sat down and pulled her toast toward her. "The one where you're thinking about something but you're not going to tell me about it." Ryan looked at his daughter. "I slept fine," he said. "Okay," she said in the tone that meant she'd registered the deflection and filed it. She ate her toast. She checked her backpack. She left at 6:53 exactly on schedule, and when she waved from the porch, his chest did the thing. It sometimes did the thing that had no name, but lived exactly behind the sternum. The thing that had started the first time he'd watched her walk into a building without him and had never fully stopped since. He called Carver at 7:05, before he opened the shop. Before the day could fill up with its ordinary requirements, Carver answered on the second ring, which meant he'd been awake, which meant he was working this. "Tell me what you actually know," Ryan said. No greeting, no preamble. Not the careful version, the real version. A pause that lasted 4 seconds. Long for Carver. Raines was released under a provision that 3 of us, when we debriefed this, agreed was procedurally incorrect, Carver said. We flagged it. The flag was noted and then buried in the kind of bureaucratic depth that things get buried in when someone with significant resources wants them buried. Who's the someone? We don't have a name yet. We have a shape, a financial signature. Someone moved money to make his release happen, and the same financial signature has appeared twice in the last 6 weeks in context related to collecting information about November 19. What kind of information? Witness accounts. Specifically the kind that would support a particular legal narrative about what happened in that facility. Ryan was quiet for a moment. Outside, a truck went past on Route 7. Ordinary. Unremarkable. They're building a case, Ryan said. Or the threat of one, Carver said. Which is worth as much. A credible threat of a case moves people, makes them do things they wouldn't otherwise do, pay things they wouldn't otherwise pay. Who else from the unit has he contacted? We don't know that he's contacted anyone directly. What we know is that 2 people who were in that building in November 19 have had their personal information, home addresses, family details, accessed by the same financial signature in the last 3 weeks. Ryan felt something go very cold and very quiet in his chest. 2 people, he said. Yes. Am I one of them? Carver took 3 seconds. Yes. The cold, quiet thing in Ryan's chest expanded by about 2 inches in every direction. Emma, he said. Your personal file has her listed as your dependent. Name, school address. Ryan set his coffee cup down on the workbench very carefully. He breathed in through his nose, out through his mouth. The way you breathe when the situation has shifted, and breathing is the one thing you can control right now, and control matters. What do you need me to do? He said. Right now, stay ordinary, Carver said. Don't change your routine. Don't pull her out of school. Don't move any significant deviation from your established pattern. We'll register if someone is watching for it, and we'd rather not tip that we're aware. You're asking me to sit still while someone has my daughter's school on file. I'm asking you to trust that we are not sitting still, Carver said. We have people on Raines. We have people on the financial trail. I'm coordinating with 2 others from the unit who are still active. This is not nothing we're doing, Cole. But we need days, maybe a week, to tighten the picture enough to move on it. This is not nothing we're doing, Cole. But we need days, maybe a week, to tighten the picture enough to move on it. And I need you to be where you are doing what you do, and not doing anything that collapses the window we're working in. Ryan looked at the bay door, looked at the empty shop, looked at the flickering light above Bay 3 that he still hadn't fixed. A week, he said. Maybe less. And if something moves before that, then you'll know what to do, Carver said. You've always known what to do. Ryan said nothing. Cole, Carver said. You built something good there. The shop, the kid, the whole thing. We're going to make sure that stays intact. That's not a comfort line. That's the mission. When did you start calling it a mission? When it started looking like one, Carver said simply, and hung up. Ryan stood in the empty shop for a full minute. Then he unlocked the bay door, rolled it up, and let the October morning come in. He worked. He worked the way. He always worked with focus, with care, with the specific discipline of a man who understands that the quality of your work is the quality of your character, and there's no dividing line between the two. He worked on Gerald's transmission, and he did it right every step, every torque spec, because Gerald Hutchins deserved a transmission done right, and because keeping his hands moving was the only thing that was going to keep his head from circling the same few dark thoughts until they wore grooves. At 9:40, Marcus Vale came back. Ryan heard the lifted Dodge crunch into the gravel lot and felt the particular alertness that the sound now triggered before he'd consciously identified what the sound was. He rolled out from under the vehicle, sat up, waited. Marcus came through the bay door. Not swaggering, not performing, just walking with the slightly uncertain quality of a man who isn't sure of his reception. He was carrying 2 cups of coffee from the diner on Main Street, the cardboard kind with the plastic lids. He held one out. Ryan looked at it. It's coffee, Marcus said. Not a trick. Ryan took it. Marcus leaned against the workbench, not occupying it the way he'd occupied the training center, not claiming territory, just resting, and drank from his own cup. I told Derek about coming here yesterday, Marcus said. He wanted to come. I told him to give it another day. He's not great with he has a harder time with the apology part of things. How's the wrist? Sore. He's icing it. Marcus looked at the transmission on the shop floor. Gerald Hutchins. Yeah. He comes in the diner on Fridays. Gets the same thing every time: eggs, wheat toast, black coffee. Never deviates. He paused. Good man. He is, Ryan said. They stood with their coffee for a moment. Outside, a car slowed on Route 7, then sped back up. Ordinary traffic. Ordinary morning. Can I ask you something? Marcus said. You can ask. Last night I kept thinking about what you said. About proving things to yourself, being the only one that matters. He turned the cup in his hands. How do you get there? Like, how does a person get to where they stop needing the other stuff? The outside stuff. The way people look at you. Ryan thought about this honestly. Not performing humility, not giving a speech. You find something worth more, he said finally. Marcus waited. For most people it's someone else, Ryan said. Someone they're responsible for. Someone whose opinion of them matters more than a room full of strangers. Marcus was quiet for a moment. You mean your daughter? I mean whoever that person is for you. Ryan drank his coffee. You got people like that. Marcus's jaw moved slightly. Something working in him. My mom, he said. She came to every single one of my tournaments. She drove 4 hours for a regional once, got there late, and I'd already won, and she cried anyway. He stopped. She doesn't know half the stuff I've done outside the gym, the way I've treated people. He looked at the floor. She'd be ashamed. Then you know what you're working with, Ryan said. Marcus looked up. She's the measurement, Ryan said. Not the trophy wall, her. Something moved across Marcus Vale's face, the specific expression of a man who has been told something he already knew, but hadn't allowed himself to know. And he looked away quickly, out at the street, at the ordinary October morning traffic. Okay, he said quietly. Okay. He finished his coffee. He set the cup on the edge of the workbench. He straightened up. I want to know if it's okay if I can come by again sometime, he said. Not for anything, I just... He stopped. I think I've been spending a lot of time around people who tell me what I want to hear, and I think I need some time around someone who doesn't. Ryan looked at him for a long moment. Shop's open 7:30 to 5, he said. Don't get in the way of the work. Marcus nodded. He walked to the bay door. He stopped at the edge of it, half in and half out of the light. Mr. Cole, he said. Ryan was already bending back toward the transmission. Ryan. A pause. Thank you. He left. Ryan went back to work. At 11:23, his phone buzzed with a text from a number he didn't recognize. No name, just a number with an Arizona area code. The text said, "Nice little town, friendly people, good coffee at the place on Main Street." Ryan read it twice. He set the phone down on the workbench. He picked it up again and read it a third time. His heart rate hadn't changed. His breathing hadn't changed. But something behind his eyes had sharpened to a point that had nothing ordinary about it. Raines was in Hargrove, or had been, or wanted Ryan to think he had been. The Main Street Diner, where Marcus got coffee this morning, where Gerald Hutchins ate eggs on Fridays, where Emma's teacher Mrs. Patterson ate lunch 3 days a week, where half the town passed through on any given morning. Small town, population 11,000, 2 stoplights, easy place to find someone, easier place to watch them. Ryan called Carver. Carver answered in one ring. Arizona area code, Ryan said. Just texted me. Said he's in town, Main Street Diner. The silence on Carver's end lasted 2 seconds. The kind of silence that means someone is already moving. Don't go to the diner, Carver said. I wasn't planning to. Don't change your visible routine. Act normal. Is Emma in school? Until 3. She stays in school. We don't pull her. Nothing changes on the surface. A pause. Cole, this is actually good. If he's made contact, it means he wants a negotiation, not a disappearance. Someone who wants to make you disappear doesn't text first. He wants leverage. Yes. And right now he's showing us where he is, which means we have a clock. Our people in Arizona have been on his financial trail since last night. We need 12 more hours. He just told me he knows where I live and where my kid goes to school. He told you he's willing to talk, Carver said. There's a difference, and it matters. Ryan looked at the phone, at the text sitting there on the screen, casual and terrible. 12 hours, Ryan said. Maybe less. I'll call you the second we move. And if he contacts me again, don't respond, don't engage, give us room. Ryan put the phone in his chest pocket. He went back to the transmission. He installed the new solenoid pack with hands that were completely steady because he would not allow them to be otherwise, because steadiness was a choice, and he'd been making that choice for 20 years, and he was not going to stop making it today. At 12:15, he ate lunch, a turkey sandwich he'd made that morning, sitting in the single plastic chair he kept in the corner of the shop. He ate it methodically, tasting nothing because his body needed fuel, and he was disciplined enough to supply it regardless of what his appetite was doing. His phone didn't buzz again. At 1:47 it did. Same Arizona number. This time it wasn't a text. It was a photo. He opened it. It was the front of Emma's school, taken from the parking lot across the street. You could see the front entrance, the flagpole, the handicapped ramp. The timestamp on the photo was 11:52, during the school day. Ryan looked at the photo for exactly 5 seconds. Then he did something he hadn't done in 3 years. He opened the contact list on his old secondary phone, the one that lived in a fireproof lockbox under his bed, the one he'd told himself he'd never need again, and he started making calls. Not to Carver. To people Carver didn't know about. People from a layer of the unit that didn't appear in any official structure. 3 men and 1 woman who'd operated in a context so specifically removed from standard chains of command that their existence required 2 separate security clearances to acknowledge. People who owed Ryan Cole nothing, except everything, because of what had happened in November of 19, and who he had never once called in on because he'd told himself he'd never need to. He called 4 numbers in 7 minutes. Every single one answered. He didn't explain much. He didn't need to. He said the name, Victor Raines. He said my daughter. He said Hargrove, Texas. And 4 people who had spent their professional lives in the machinery of difficult situations said in 4 different ways the same thing. Give me 2 hours. Ryan locked the shop at 2:05. He drove to Emma's school. He didn't go in. He parked 2 blocks away on a side street with a clear sightline to the main entrance, and he sat in his truck, and he watched the building and every car in the parking lot, and every person on the sidewalk within 300 yards. He watched it the way he'd once watched a building in a country he couldn't name for 11 hours, without moving, without looking away. At 2:57, the dismissal bell rang, and children came out of the front entrance in the flowing, chaotic way that children exit buildings in groups and pairs alone with backpacks, bouncing and conversations already in progress before the door was fully open. He saw Emma's green sweater before he saw her face. She came out in a group of 3 girls talking, gesturing with both hands in the way she gestured when she was telling a story she was invested in. She looked perfectly fine. She looked like a 9-year-old at the end of a school day with nothing wrong in the world. He watched the lot, the sidewalk, the cars. Nothing. Nobody. She looked for the carpool. Lane didn't see his truck in it. Checked her watch, a practical digital one she'd saved up for with her own money, and pulled out her phone to call him. His phone buzzed. "Dad, where are you?" He texted back, 2 blocks, coming. He pulled around the block and into the front loop, and she climbed in with the momentum of someone who has things to tell you and has been waiting to tell them since noon. Sophia apologized, she announced before the door was fully closed. Good. She said she was wrong and I was right about the project idea, and we're doing it together now, which is actually what I wanted in the first place, so everything worked out. It usually does, Ryan said. She looked at him with the off-center assessment. Why did you park 2 blocks away? Traffic in the loop, he said. She considered this for about 2 seconds, apparently found it sufficient, and moved on to explaining the science project, which involved something about water filtration and a hypothesis that she'd been refining since Tuesday. Ryan drove home on streets he knew by heart. He checked every rearview moment and kept his voice level and asked the right questions about the water filtration hypothesis and felt the weight of the afternoon sitting in the center of his chest like something that hadn't been resolved and wouldn't be until it was. His secondary phone buzzed at 3:31. He was at his kitchen counter making Emma's after-school snack. She was at the table with her homework. He glanced at the screen. One word from one of the 4 numbers he'd called found him. He put the phone in his pocket. He finished making the snack apple slices, peanut butter, a glass of milk, and put it on the table next to Emma's textbook. Thank you, she said without looking up from the math problem she was working. You're welcome, he said. He walked to the back porch, closed the door quietly, and called the number back. The woman who answered had a voice like something made of steel wire, thin, precise, strong under pressure. Her name in the context of November of 19 had been Calloway. He didn't know if that was her real name. He'd never asked. He checked into a motel off Route 9 under a name that's not his, Calloway said. We've confirmed visual. He's alone. No visible backup in the motel or the immediate area, though he's made 2 phone calls in the last hour that we're working on identifying. Who's he calling? First one was local, a number registered to a car rental agency, which means he may be switching vehicles. Second one was to an international number. We're working on it. Does Carver know you're involved? No, Calloway said without inflection. Ryan processed this. Keep it that way for now. Already planned on it, Cole. A pause. The photo of the school. Yeah. He took it. He sent it. He wanted you to know he was capable of it. That's the message. Not a plan. Not an action. A capability demonstration. He's doing exactly what Carver said he wants: leverage for a negotiation. What's the negotiation? We don't know yet. But based on the financial signature Carver's team identified, whoever's funding him wants information about November 19 that either confirms a specific version of events or discredits the official one. Which means what they actually want is a statement from someone who was there. From me, Ryan said. You were the ranking officer in that facility, Calloway said. Your account carries the most weight. Ryan leaned against the back of the house looking at the yard. Emma's bike leaned against the fence. A soccer ball that had been there since August. The ordinary evidence of a child's life, small and specific and achingly real. "What are my options?" he said. "You have 3, Calloway said. 1. You wait for Carver's timeline and let the official process work. Estimated 48 to 72 hours before they can move on, Rains legally. 2. You make contact with Rains directly and control the negotiation yourself, which carries risk, but also gives you information. 3. We resolve this at the source tonight, which means Rains wakes up tomorrow morning in a situation where contacting you is no longer of interest to him." Ryan was quiet for a moment. "Define resolve," he said. "He leaves Hargrove," Calloway said, thoroughly convinced that whatever leverage he thought he had here doesn't exist. No harm, just clarity. Ryan thought about Emma's homework at the kitchen table, the water filtration hypothesis, the soccer ball in the yard. "How clean is option 3, he said. "Very," Calloway said. "We've done harder things with less." He knew that was true. He'd been there for some of them. "Give me an hour," he said. "You have it." He went back inside. Emma was still at the table working through the math problem with the focused patience she brought to things that required it. She looked up when he came in, checked his face the way she checked it, and then looked back down at her paper. "The filtration project," she said, writing as she talked, "needs a control group. Mrs. Patterson said so. Sophia thinks we should do 3 samples like 3 different water sources. I think that's too many variables at once." She frowned at her paper. "What do you think?" Ryan sat down across from her. He looked at her. He thought about November of 19, about Victor Rains, about a photo of a school entrance taken at 11:52 in the morning. He thought about Emma at 4 years old, drawing a smiley face on his tool bag. He thought about her at 6, deciding that the porch light had to stay on. He thought about her at 9, sitting here with her water filtration hypothesis, and her horse sweater, and her slightly off-center ponytail, asking him to think through the scientific method with her, like it was the most important question in the world. Because to her, it was. Because she'd never had to know about any of the rest of it, and he was going to make absolutely sure that was still true tomorrow morning. "Start with 2 sources," he said. "Simpler hypothesis, cleaner data. You can add the 3rd one for the extension if you want to go further." She considered this seriously. 2 is more manageable, she agreed. "Better sample size control." "Exactly." She went back to writing. He sat with her while she finished her homework and told himself one more time what he'd always told himself about this part of his life, that this was what the rest of it had been for. Not the medals, not the clearances, not the missions with names he couldn't say. This, the kitchen table, the homework, the ordinary, miraculous, unremarkable presence of a person who trusted him completely to keep the world the right size. At 4:49 he stepped outside again and called Calloway. "Option 3, he said. "But I want to know the moment it's done." "You'll know," Calloway said. "And Calloway." He paused. "Thank you." "November 19, she said simply, as if that explained everything, because it did. He went inside and started making dinner. At 6:17, his secondary phone buzzed once. One word, done. He pocketed the phone and stirred the pasta. Emma wandered in from the living room, where she'd been watching a nature documentary with the focused seriousness she brought to nature documentaries, and climbed onto her chair and looked at the pot on the stove. "Spaghetti again," she said. "Again," he confirmed. She considered this with the philosophical acceptance of someone who has decided to pick her battles. "Okay, but next time, can we do the kind with the meat sauce like actual meat in it?" "Next time," he said. "Promise." He looked at her. "Yeah," he said. "I promise." She accepted this with a nod and hopped back off the chair and went back to the documentary. Ryan turned back to the stove. His hand was steady. His breathing was even. The kitchen was warm. And somewhere off Route 9, a man named Victor Rains was in a motel room, arriving at the very clear conclusion that the leverage he'd driven to Hargrove, Texas to establish did not in fact exist, and that remaining in this town was no longer in his interest. Ryan didn't know the specifics of how Calloway and the others had arranged that. He didn't need to. He'd learned a long time ago to trust the people who'd been in the building with him. The ones who knew what the night cost. The ones who showed up when you called without question, without hesitation. Because some debts weren't financial, and some promises weren't verbal, and some things were simply understood between people who had stood in the same impossible places and come out the other side. He set the table for two. He called Emma in. They ate together, and she told him 3 more things about the nature documentary. Did he know that certain species of fish could change their coloring based on emotional state? Wasn't that incredible? Didn't he think that was like the most interesting thing? And he said yes, it was incredible. And yes, he thought it was very interesting. And she said right. In the tone that meant she was pleased to have someone who agreed with her, and the dinner was ordinary and warm and completely absolutely fine. And later, after she was in bed, and the house was quiet, Ryan sat at the kitchen table with his hands around a cup of coffee and thought about Carver's timeline and the 12 hours that had become 6, that had become resolved before Carver's people had reached the finish line. He thought about whether to tell Carver about the 4 calls. He'd tell him tomorrow. Tonight, there was nothing left to manage. He looked at the drawing on the counter. Dad fixes everything. He finished his coffee. He turned off the kitchen light. He went to bed. And for the first time in 2 days, he slept all the way through to 5:42. He called Carver at 7:03 the next morning. Emma was already at school. The shop wasn't open yet. Ryan was sitting in his truck in the driveway with the engine off and the coffee going cold in the cup holder, doing the thing he'd been doing since 5:42, which was deciding exactly how much to say and in what order. Carver answered on the first ring. Rains left Hargrove last night, Carver said before Ryan could open his mouth. Motel off Route 9, checked out at 9:47 p.m. We had eyes on the motel, but he used a service exit we hadn't fully covered. By the time we repositioned, he was already on the highway heading west. Ryan said nothing. I want to know, Carver said very carefully, whether his decision to leave was influenced by something outside my timeline. The morning was gray and still. A sparrow landed on the fence post at the edge of the driveway, looked around with the decisive urgency of a bird who has places to be, and flew off. He sent me a photo of Emma's school, Ryan said, taken during school hours. A silence. You should have told me that the moment it happened, Carver said. I handled it. Another silence. Longer this time. The kind that meant Carver was running calculations. How? Carver said. Not a question. More like a word placed in the space between them to see what Ryan would put next to it. People I trust, Ryan said. Nobody got hurt. He left. His leverage evaporated before he could use it, and he's smart enough to know that a position without leverage isn't worth holding. These people you trust, Carver said. Are they going to create problems for what we're building on the legal side? No. You're certain? I'm certain. Another pause. Ryan could hear Carver breathing, which was unusual because Carver was the kind of man who did not let himself be heard doing ordinary things. Cole, he said finally, I understand why you did it. With Emma involved, I would have done the same thing. But going outside the structure. He had a photo of my daughter's school, Carver, taken at noon on a school day. The silence that followed, that had a different texture. Not the calculating kind. The kind that meant a man had run headlong into a wall of plain truth, and the wall had won. Understood, Carver said quietly. What happens now? Ryan said. Rains is mobile, which makes him harder, but not impossible. The financial signature is still live. Whoever's funding him hasn't pulled back just because he changed motels. We keep working the money trail, that's where the actual answer is. Rains is a contractor. The person who hired him is the problem. Do you have a name yet? Getting closer, Carver said. 2 days, maybe 3. Tell me when you have it. I will. A pause. And Cole. Keep the secondary channel dark for now. If Rains or whoever's behind him has any visibility into your communications, I don't want them seeing activity that tells them you've got more resources than a small-town mechanic. Already planning on it, Ryan said. He hung up. He sat in the truck for another 2 minutes, drinking the cold coffee, watching the ordinary morning do its ordinary things. A neighbor walked a dog. The mail truck went past. The flag on the elementary school 2 streets over caught a wind he couldn't feel from here and stood out straight for a moment, then went slack. He got out of the truck and opened the shop. Work waited. Work always waited. And he had a transmission to finish and a brake job coming in at 10, and the flickering light in Bay 3 that he had now officially decided was getting fixed today, because some things you kept postponing until you stopped postponing them, and today was the day. Howe was on the ladder with the replacement fixture at 8:19 when he heard footsteps on the gravel that he identified before they reached the bay door. Not by sound exactly, more by rhythm, by the particular gait of someone who was trying to project casualness and not entirely succeeding. Derek Vale came through the door. His right wrist was wrapped in a professional elastic bandage, the kind that came from a pharmacy rather than a first aid kit on a wall. He was in jeans and a plain gray sweatshirt, and he stood inside the bay door with his hands one good one wrapped, held slightly away from his body, which Ryan recognized as a conscious display of non-threat. A man showing his posture on purpose. "Marcus said you gave him coffee," Derek said. "I didn't bring coffee." Ryan finished tightening the fixture and climbed down the ladder. He looked at Derek. "Wrist okay," he said. "Sore. It's a first-degree sprain, the urgent care said. No structural damage." He paused. "Which means you knew exactly how far to take it." "Yes," Ryan said. Derek absorbed this. He looked at the light fixture Ryan had just replaced, as if the ceiling were the most interesting thing in the room, while he figured out what he wanted to say next. "I don't apologize well," Derek said. "I want to say that up front. Marcus is better at the talking part. I'm better at other parts. So this is probably going to come out wrong, and I want you to know in advance that I mean it right." Ryan waited. "What we did the other night was wrong," Derek said. "Not just wrong because you could have put us both in the hospital and chose not to. Wrong because of the way we treated you when you walked in. The things we said. The way we acted like you were less than us because of the job you were doing." He stopped. "My dad was a mechanic. Did 20 years as a mechanic. Good man. One of the best men I've ever known. And the way I talked to you, he would have been ashamed of me." He looked directly at Ryan for the first time since he'd walked in. "I'm ashamed of me." Ryan let that sit in the air for a moment without rushing to fill it. "Okay," he said. Derek blinked. "That's it. What else do you want?" "I don't know. I thought you'd make it harder." "Making it harder doesn't get anything done," Ryan said. He turned back to the ladder and folded it. "Your dad's still around." Something moved across Derek's face. Quick, and then controlled the way pain moves when a person has learned to manage it in public. "No, 6 years ago." "What kind of mechanic was he?" "Bodywork mostly. Collision repair. He could look at a car that had been hit and tell you what it had been before the accident, better than the original manufacturer could." A pause. "He had a shop in Killeen, ran it for 22 years. You grew up in it." "Yeah, sweeping floors at 8, running parts by 12, doing basic work at 15. Derek looked at the shop floor, at the transmission sitting in its cradle on the dolly, at the organized rows of tools along the wall. "He wanted me to take it over. I chose the gym instead." He paused. "I've wondered sometimes whether that was the right call." Ryan put the ladder against the wall and turned on the new light. It came on clean and steady, no flicker. He looked at it for a moment with the quiet satisfaction of a thing fixed. "Both can be right at different times," Ryan said. "Doesn't have to be one or the other." Derek looked at him. "You ever regret leaving the military?" Ryan didn't answer immediately. He considered the question the way it deserved, which was seriously. "Every life costs something," he said finally. "The one you picked and the one you didn't. You pay either way. The question is just which costs you more." Derek was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "What did your life cost you?" Ryan looked at him. At this younger man with his wrapped wrist, and his dead father, and his tournament record, and his gold chain, catching the light of the newly fixed fixture. At someone who was trying in his clumsy and imperfect way to find the shape of something worth being. "Everything except the part I kept," Ryan said. Derek seemed to understand what he meant by that. He nodded once slowly. "Okay," he said. He turned to leave. He got to the bay door and stopped. "The hold you used on my wrist," he said without turning around. "That lateral rotation control before the joint lock. I've never seen that entry point. I've trained for 6 years, and I've never seen anyone enter from that angle." Ryan said nothing. "Could you—" Derek stopped. Started again. "Would you ever be willing to show it? Not to use it on people the way we were using things, just to understand it. Because I've been thinking about it for 2 days, and I can't reconstruct the mechanics, and it's driving me crazy." Ryan picked up a shop rag. He wiped his hands. He looked at Derek Vale and thought about a man named Carver and a man named Victor Rains and a photo of a school entrance and November of 19. He thought about what it cost to pass something on and what it cost not to. Saturday, he said. "After the tournament. Bring Marcus. I'll be here." Derek turned around, and his face had something on it that it hadn't carried when he walked in. Not gratitude exactly. More like the specific relief of a person who expected a door to be closed and found it open. "Saturday," he said. "We'll be here." He left. Ryan went back to Gerald's transmission. By noon, he'd finished the installation, run the diagnostic, confirmed everything was within spec, and parked Gerald's truck in the front lot with a note under the wiper and a bill in the glove box. $260. Reasonable. Fair. The kind of number that let Gerald tell Margaret without the conversation becoming complicated. He was eating the same turkey sandwich he'd made that morning when his secondary phone buzzed. Callaway. "The international number Rains called," she said without preamble. "We have a location, Istanbul, and we have a name. It's not who Carver thinks it is." Ryan set the sandwich down. "Who is it?" he said. "Someone from inside the building," Callaway said. "November 19. Someone who was on our side." The shop was completely silent. Ryan heard the refrigeration unit in the drink cooler at the gas station next door cycle on. He heard a semi-downshift on Route 7. He heard his own breathing slow and even, because he would not let it become anything else. "Say that again," he said. "The person funding Rains. The financial signature Carver's team has been following. It traces back to a private account in Istanbul, connected to a holding company, that connects to a name I recognized from the November 19 debrief files." Callaway paused. "Cole, it's Harmon." Ryan felt the cold thing in his chest come back, but different this time. Not the spreading cold of a threat from outside. The sharper, specific cold of a betrayal, which was different in temperature and different in location. Not the chest, more behind the eyes, where you process what you've been told, and your brain keeps rejecting it, and then stops rejecting it, and then has to figure out what to do with knowing. Lieutenant Colonel Richard Harmon had been the mission coordinator for November 19. He'd been in the building. He'd signed the debrief documents. He'd shaken Ryan's hand in the hallway afterward and said in the specific dry understatement of career officers, "Good work in there, Cole. Clean result." He'd retired 14 months later with a commendation. Ryan had sent him a card. "Harmon," Ryan said. "Yes." "Why?" "We don't know the full picture yet. But the narrative his money is trying to build, if Rains could have gotten a statement from you, something that called the official version of November 19 into question. Harmon could have used that. We think there was money involved in that facility that didn't make it into the official accounting. Significant money. And we think Harmon knows where it went because he put it there, and the only way that stays buried is if the official version of that night stays clean." Ryan sat in the plastic chair in the corner of his shop. He looked at the far wall. At Gerald's receipt tacked to the board next to 3 others. At the photo Emma had drawn him, which he'd taped to the corner of the whiteboard 2 days ago. At the flickering light that was no longer flickering. "He was trying to get me to contradict myself," Ryan said. "On record. So he'd have something to point to if anyone ever looked at him. A conflicting account from the ranking officer on scene." "That's our read, yes," Callaway said. "And when I didn't cooperate, Rains escalated to the photograph, the implied threat." "Correct. To push you into a position where you'd either cooperate or leave, and either way, Harmon creates distance from the official record." Ryan was quiet for a moment. "Does Carver know about Harmon?" he he said. No. Carver's team has the financial signature, but they haven't traced it all the way back yet. They're close. Another 12 to 16 hours probably. She paused. Cole. Harmon has friends in positions that could complicate Carver's approach. If Carver reaches Harmon's name through official channels, those friends will know before Carver can act on it. Ryan understood exactly what she was telling him. You want to move first, he said. I want you to decide, Calloway said. This is your call. It was always your call. You were the ranking officer in that building, and you're the one Harmon targeted. How this gets resolved belongs to you. Ryan stood up from the plastic chair. He walked to the bay door and looked out at Route 7. At the ordinary traffic of an ordinary Friday in a small town that had no idea any of this was happening within its borders. I thought about Harmon's handshake in the hallway. Good work in there, Cole. Clean result. He thought about what clean meant to a man who'd been skimming from an operation and needed the official record to stay exactly the way he'd written it. I thought about two men from his unit who'd come home from November 19, different in ways they'd never fully explained. He'd always told himself it was the mission itself, the weight of it. Now he wondered if it was something else. If they'd seen something or known something that Harmon had spent 6 years hoping they'd never say out loud. Give Carver's team another 6 hours, Ryan said. Let them get to Harmon's name through their own trail. When they do, they'll have the documentation to move on it properly. That's the cleanest path. And if Harmon's people see it coming and start cleaning up, Calloway said, then we reassess. He paused. But I want this done right. Not just done. Right. If Harmon gets a lawyer in front of a procedural problem, it all falls apart. Carver's team has the documentation. Let them use it. Calloway was quiet for a moment. You always were the most patient person in every room, she said. I used to find it annoying. I find it considerably less annoying now. 6 hours, Ryan said. I'll hold, she said, and hung up. Ryan went back inside. He looked at the shop and all the things waiting in it, and he did something he rarely did in the middle of a workday. He sat down. Not in the plastic chair. On the floor back against the workbench, knees up, like a man who needs a moment of contact with something solid, and floor is the most solid thing available. He sat there for 3 minutes. He thought about Harmon. He thought about the men from his unit. I thought about the fact that the thing he'd spent 3 years trying to leave behind, not just the work, but the specific weight of knowing things that couldn't be. Unknowing was sitting here in his quiet shop in Hargrove, Texas, having followed him the way certain things follow you, no matter how far you go. And he thought about Emma. He thought about what she'd said 2 mornings ago. The observation delivered with the matter-of-fact precision of a child who has learned to read her father's face because she loves him, and attention is the most straightforward form of love available to her. You have that look. The one where you're thinking about something but you're not going to tell me about it. She was right. He did have that look. He'd had it for 3 days. He got up off the floor. He had a brake job coming in at 3:30, and he was going to be ready for it. The 3:30 came in at 3:41. A woman named Linda Park, who'd bought the Silverado used 2 years ago, and treated it the way responsible people treat used vehicles they plan to keep, which was with regular attention and the willingness to spend money on maintenance before things became emergencies. Ryan liked customers like that. He liked being able to tell someone their brakes were worn but not urgent, because it meant he got to give them good news, and good news was in shorter supply than it should be. Howe was finishing the inspection when his main phone buzzed. A text from a number he didn't recognize. He looked at it. Cole, this is Harmon. I think we should talk. Ryan read it twice. He looked at the time. 4:19 p.m. He thought about 6 hours. He'd asked Calloway to hold for 6 hours, which had started at noon, which meant the window ran until 6 p.m. He had 1 hour and 41 minutes. He typed back, I have your number. I'll call when I'm ready. He put the phone in his pocket and finished Linda Park's brake inspection. He told her the fronts were at about 30%, but the rears were fine. He told her the fronts could wait another 2,000 to 3,000 miles, but not much beyond that. He told her he could do them today if she wanted, or schedule for next week. She said next week worked. She was picking up her granddaughter from college this weekend and didn't want to be without the truck. He scheduled her for Tuesday. She drove away. He stood in the empty shop and looked at his phone. Harmon had reached out directly. That meant one of two things. Either Harmon had decided that negotiation was better than whatever Rains had been sent to arrange, or Harmon knew his financial trail was getting close to identification and was trying to get ahead of it. Either way, Harmon reaching out directly was significant. It meant the situation was moving faster than Carver's timeline. He called Calloway. Harmon texted me directly, he said. 4:19. A pause. That accelerates things. Yeah, is Carver's team close? I've been monitoring passively. They identified the Istanbul holding company 40 minutes ago. They're running the corporate registration trace now. Best estimate they reach Harmon's name in 90 minutes to 2 hours. Harmon reaching out to me means he might be aware they're close, Ryan said. He's looking for an exit, a negotiated exit where I give him something he can use to muddy the water before Carver's team gets there. Don't respond to him, Calloway said. Not yet. Give Carver's team the 90 minutes. If Harmon texts again before then, I need to know immediately. Understood. He paused. Calloway. The men from the unit who knew something. The two I was thinking about. Are they safe? A pause that was slightly too long. They're fine, she said. I checked on both of them yesterday. You checked on them, Ryan said slowly. Before I called you? Yes. You were already working this before I called. Another pause. Rains's release came across my radar 3 weeks ago. I've been running a parallel track. When I saw your name on his contact list, I was planning to call you. You called me first. Ryan absorbed this. 3 weeks, he said. You were working this for 3 weeks and you didn't call. I didn't have enough to tell you anything useful, she said. And I know how you've built your life there. I didn't want to put weight on it before I had something solid to put the weight on. Ryan was quiet for a moment. Next time, he said. 3 weeks earlier. Yes, she said. That's fair? He hung up. He locked the shop at 5:05. He drove home, made dinner, the spaghetti with actual meat sauce because he'd promised, and he kept his promises, and sat at the table with Emma while she told him about the water filtration project and how she and Sophia had agreed on the 2-sample approach, and Mrs. Patterson had said it was a strong hypothesis, and she was proud of herself in the specific way she showed pride, which was not by saying she was proud, but by telling him every detail of the things she'd done right. At 6:47, his phone buzzed. Carver. Cole, Carver said, and his voice had the particular quality it carried when something had cracked open. Not excited. Carver didn't do excited, but present in a way that was different from his usual flatness. We have a name. Tell me, Ryan said. Harmon, Carver said. Ryan said nothing. You don't sound surprised, Carver said slowly. I'm surprised, Ryan said carefully. Go ahead. We've traced the financial signature to a holding company in Istanbul that registers to a shell company in Luxembourg that connects to a private wealth management account in the name of Richard Harmon, retired Lieutenant Colonel, United States Army. Carver's voice was controlled, but there was something underneath it, the specific weight of a man who has just found a betrayal in a place he trusted. 14 months after November 19, he retired with a commendation. 18 months after that, the Istanbul account opened. The amounts moving through it are consistent with someone who has been very selectively selling information for 6 years. Ryan said nothing. He targeted you because you were the ranking officer on scene, Carver continued. A contradicting statement from you would have been the most valuable thing he could have bought. When Rains couldn't get it, the photograph was the escalation. A pause. We have enough to move. I'm coordinating with the appropriate authorities tonight. Harmon will know we're moving by tomorrow morning at the latest. He may already suspect it. He texted me directly this afternoon, Ryan said. 4:19. A very long silence. And you're telling me now, Carver said. I'm telling you now, Ryan said. Cole, you have what you need to move on him, Ryan said. That's what matters. The text was a negotiation attempt. He wanted me to give him cover before you got there. I didn't respond. He paused. Carver, Move fast. He's smart and he's connected, and the longer he has to work his contacts, the more complicated your morning gets. Carver breathed once audibly. Yeah, he said. Yeah, we're moving. He paused. And Cole. We should talk about the full picture when this is resolved. The 3 weeks, the parallel track, all of it. So Carver knew about Calloway. Or knew enough. When it's resolved, Ryan said. When it's resolved, Carver agreed. He hung up. Ryan put the phone in his pocket and went back to the kitchen where Emma was rinsing her plate at the sink, with the careful thoroughness of someone who has been told that rinsing before the dishwasher is important and has taken this information seriously. You keep going outside to talk on the phone, she said. Work stuff, he said. She rinsed the plate, considered this. Is everything okay? He took the plate from her and put it in the dishwasher. Everything is fine, he said. And meant it. For the first time in 4 days, he meant it completely. She dried her hands on the dish towel and looked at him with the particular assessment that he had long since accepted as one of the defining features of living. With a person who was, despite being 9 years old, significantly more perceptive than most adults he'd met. You look better, she said. Yeah, you had that look for 3 days. It's gone now. She hung the towel back on its hook. Whatever it was, I'm glad it worked out. He looked at her. This small, serious, perceptive person, with her off-center ponytail, and her water filtration hypothesis, and her absolute unshakable faith that he would handle whatever needed handling. Me too, he said. She nodded, satisfied, and went to brush her teeth. Ryan stood in the kitchen and let the quiet settle back around him like something coming home. He thought about Harmon. He thought about Calloway and Carver and the men from his unit who'd come home carrying things they'd never explained. He thought about November of 19 and what it had cost and who had been paying the wrong version of that cost for 6 years. I thought about justice, which was a word he'd had a complicated relationship with for most of his adult life, because he'd seen it work and he'd seen it fail, and he knew the distance between those two outcomes was usually people. Specific people. Making specific choices at specific moments. Tonight, the right people were making the right choices. That had to be enough. He turned off the kitchen light. He checked the back door. He stood for a moment in the hallway outside Emma's room and listened to her brushing her teeth, the vigorous, methodical brushing of a child who has been told twice about cavities and does not intend to experience them, and thought that this sound, this ordinary domestic sound of a 9-year-old brushing her teeth before bed, was the thing he'd been keeping safe through all of it. Not a mission. Not a record. Not a version of events. This. He went to check the porch light. It was on. It was always on. He went to bed. He woke at 5:42 to the sound of his main phone ringing. Not buzzing. Ringing. Full volume, which meant he'd forgotten to set it to silent before bed. Which almost never happened. Which told him how completely the previous 4 days had disrupted his routines in ways he hadn't fully measured. He grabbed it off the nightstand. Carver, 5:43 a.m. on a Saturday. It's done, Carver said. Ryan sat up. Federal agents made contact with Harmon at his residence in McLean, Virginia at 5:20 this morning, Carver said. He was home. He didn't run. He had a lawyer on the phone within 4 minutes, which tells you he'd been expecting it. But expecting it and being ready for it are two different things. The documentation we assembled last night is, Cole, it's airtight. 6 years of transactions. The Istanbul account. The Luxembourg shell. 3 instances of information sale to foreign nationals. And the Rains connection, fully documented, including the financial authorization for the Hargrove operation. He paused. This is not going to be a situation where someone walks on a procedural problem. This is the full picture. Ryan stood up, moved to the window. The street outside was dark, still the particular deep blue of very early morning, before the light starts deciding what color it wants to be. The 2 men from the unit, Ryan said. The ones who came back different from November 19. Are they going to be pulled into this? Their accounts will be needed, Carver said. But as witnesses, not subjects. What they know, what they saw in that facility before we got there. What Harmon directed them to overlook, that's going to be central to the prosecution's case. He paused. I've already spoken to both of them this morning. They're ready to talk. I think they've been ready to talk for 6 years and didn't know who was safe to say it to. Ryan absorbed that. 6 years. Two men carrying something that had no name and no outlet because the person who should have been trustworthy had been the problem. Calloway, Ryan said. A pause. I know about the parallel track, Carver said. 3 weeks. I'm not going to pretend I'm not annoyed by it. I'm also not going to pretend I don't understand why she ran it that way. His voice went flat in the particular way it did when he was being honest about something he'd rather not be honest about. She didn't trust the official channels entirely. Given that the contamination turned out to be at Harmon's level, she wasn't wrong not to. No, Ryan said. She wasn't. We'll sort out the structural conversation later, Carver said. Right now, I want you to know that from where you're standing, this is over. Raines has no contract, no funding, and is being picked up this morning in Albuquerque, which is apparently where he went after leaving Hargrove. Harmon is in federal custody. The financial trail is fully documented and in the right hands. He paused. You're clear, Cole. Emma is clear. It's done. Ryan stood at the window and watched the street begin to make up its mind about the morning light. He let the word done sit in him for a moment. It was a word he'd learned to be careful about. In his experience, things that were done had a way of not being entirely done, of leaving residue, of showing up 3 years later in the form of a text from an Arizona area code. But this had a different quality. This had documentation and federal jurisdiction, and 6 years of financial records, and 2 men who were finally ready to say what they knew. This had weight in the direction of finished. Thank you, Ryan said. Don't thank me, Carver said. You built the life that was worth protecting. I just helped keep it intact. A pause. Take the weekend, Cole. Be with your kid. Ryan almost smiled. Already planning on it. He hung up. He stood at the window for another full minute, doing the thing he did after major situations resolved, the mental equivalent of checking every room in a building after clearing it, making sure nothing had been missed, nothing left in a state that would cause problems later. He went through it methodically. Harmon federal custody documented. Raines being picked up in Albuquerque. The financial trail in the right hands. The 2 men from the unit ready to speak, protected by their witness status. Calloway running her own track, which had been the right call even if it sat sideways with official structure. Carver closing it correctly. Every room checked. Every door secured. He exhaled slowly through his nose. Then he went to make coffee and Emma's lunch because it was Saturday and she didn't have school, but she woke up at 7:30, regardless, and came to the kitchen looking for breakfast with the same punctual reliability as on school days, and the lunch was actually for the tournament he'd told her about last week, which they were attending because Ethan Brooks had called Thursday and said he'd love for Ryan to come, no obligation. Just he thought Ryan might find it interesting to see what the gym looked like when it was running the way it was supposed to. Ryan had said he'd think about it. Then he'd told Emma there might be a martial arts tournament this morning, and she'd looked at him with focused interest and said she'd never seen one, and it might be good research for the self-defense class she'd been asking to take, and that was that. He wrote the note for her lunch today. It said, "The bravest thing is showing up. I love you." Dad, and folded it under the apple slices the same way he always did. At 7:28. Emma appeared in the kitchen doorway in jeans and a yellow hoodie, her hair already in the off-center ponytail, looking like someone who had slept the complete, uncomplicated sleep of a person with nothing unresolved. "Is today the tournament?" she said. "Today's the tournament." "Can I bring my notebook?" "What do you need your notebook for?" She looked at him with the specific patience of someone who has asked to take a self-defense class approximately 14 times. "Research," she said. He put her breakfast on the table. "Bring your notebook," he said. She sat down with the focused efficiency of someone who had places to be and ate her eggs in 7 minutes. Ryan drank his coffee and watched her, and felt something in the center of his chest that had been tight for 4 days begin slowly to release. Not all at once. Not dramatically. Just the way a held breath releases when the reason for holding it is finally completely gone. He thought about Harmon. I thought about a handshake in a hallway 6 years ago and the words, "Good work in there, Cole," and what those words had meant to a man who'd spent 20 years believing that the people in authority above him operated from the same basic set of values he did. He'd been wrong about Harmon. That was a specific and uncomfortable thing to be wrong about. But he'd been right about Carver. He'd been right about Calloway. He'd been right about the 4 people who'd answered when he called. In the accounting of trust, that was a number that still added up. They drove to the Peak Performance Martial Arts Center at 8:40, arriving 20 minutes before the first bracket started. The parking lot was full in a way Ryan had never seen it. Cars along the gravel edges, a few parked up on the grass, the vinyl banner above the entrance, bright against the gray October morning sky. Through the walls, he could hear the specific noise of a large indoor gathering before it fully gets going. Voices layered over each other, equipment, sounds, the occasional sharp crack of someone working a heavy bag. Emma was already writing something in her notebook before they got out of the truck. "What are you writing?" Ryan said. "Observations," she said. "I like to start before I go in. First impressions." Ryan looked at his daughter. "Fair enough," he said. Inside, Brooks met them at the entrance. A compact man in his 60s, with gray at his temples, and the particular physicality of someone who had trained seriously for decades and let the training settle into his posture rather than his size. He shook Ryan's hand with both of his and looked at Emma with the formal courtesy adults sometimes deploy with children who are clearly paying attention. "You must be Emma," Brooks said. "Yes," Emma said. "My dad fixed your heater." "He did," Brooks said. "He also—" He stopped and looked at Ryan with a slight adjustment to his expression. "He did a very good job." "He usually does," Emma said, writing something. Brooks looked at Ryan. Ryan looked at nothing in particular. "Come on in," Brooks said. "I'll show you where to sit." Good view of the main mat from the east side. The gym was transformed. The same space Ryan had walked into 4 nights ago. Cold, dim, 2 men positioning themselves to establish dominance, was now warm and lit and full of life. Kids and GIs moved through the crowd with the barely managed energy of people who have been preparing for something and are now minutes away from it. Parents sat in folding chairs along the walls. Coaches clustered near the edge of the mat talking strategy in low voices. The trophy shelf along the back wall that Ryan had noted before was today framed by a banner reading, "5th Annual Hargrove Invitational." 30 kids from 4 counties, Brooks had said. Ryan counted closer to 40. They found seats on the east side. Emma immediately began writing in her notebook with the methodical focus of a field researcher. Ryan sat beside her with his coffee in its carry cup and watched the room. He saw Marcus and Derek near the coaches section about 3 minutes after sitting down. Marcus was running warm-up drills with a group of older teenagers, moving them through footwork patterns with a precision and patience that was entirely different from the man who'd stood in this room 4 nights ago and told a mechanic he didn't belong. Derek was wrapping a young boy's hands with the careful attention of someone who takes the responsibility seriously, talking to the boy in a low voice, nodding when the boy responded, the wrapped wrist moving with only a slight stiffness. Ryan watched them for a while. He thought about what Marcus had said in the gravel lot. "I've been spending a lot of time around people who tell me what I want to hear." He thought about Derek's face when the bay door had been open, and he'd asked if Saturday still worked, and the specific relief in it. He thought about a father in Killeen who'd run a body shop for 22 years and wanted his son to take it over. Some people found the version of themselves worth being through the thing they'd always done. Others found it by circling back to something they'd left behind. And some, maybe most, found it by walking through a door they hadn't planned to walk through and meeting someone who looked at them without performing and without fear and simply told them the truth. At 9:07, the first bracket started. Emma stopped writing and started watching. She watched with the complete absorbed attention she brought to things that interested her slightly forward. Eyes tracking the mat mouth, slightly open pen, hovering over the notebook, in case something required noting but not moving, because nothing could be noted without first being fully observed. She watched a 12-year-old boy win his first bout with a throw that landed cleanly and sat up immediately to check on the boy he'd thrown, extending a hand to help him up, and Emma wrote something in her notebook that Ryan didn't ask to read. At 9:50, Marcus came over. He stood at the end of their row and looked at Ryan with the new version of himself that Ryan had been watching develop over the last 4 days. Not the absence of confidence, but a different kind of confidence, the kind that doesn't need the room to acknowledge it. "Glad you came," he said. "Good event," Ryan said. Marcus looked at Emma, who looked up from her notebook with the frank assessment she applied to new people. "Hi," she said. "Hi," Marcus said. "You Ryan's daughter?" "Yes," Emma said. "Are you one of the coaches?" "I help out," Marcus said. He paused. "Your dad teach you anything?" Emma looked at Ryan. Ryan said nothing. "He taught me to check both ways twice at an intersection," Emma said. "And how to read a receipt so nobody overcharges you. And how to tell when a person is actually listening versus when they're just waiting for you to stop talking." Marcus blinked. "That last one," he said slowly, "is the most useful thing I've heard all week." Emma wrote something in her notebook. "She's something else," Marcus said to Ryan quietly. "Yeah," Ryan said. "She is." Marcus went back to his kids. At 10:30 between brackets, Brooks came and sat in the empty chair on Ryan's other side. He sat the way men sit when they have something they want to say and are deciding how to say it. Settled, but not entirely relaxed. The forward lean of someone with something on their mind. "I looked you up," Brooks said quietly. "After Thursday. I have some contacts from when I was running security consultation work in the 90s. I made some calls." He paused. "I didn't find much, which I understand is by design, but I found enough to understand what I was looking at." Ryan watched the mat. "Okay," he said. "I want to say something, and I want you to hear it the right way." Brooks looked at his hands and at the mat, then at Ryan. "I've spent 30 years in martial arts. I've met a lot of men who were dangerous. Most of them needed you to know it. They needed the room to know it. It was the center of how they operated." He paused. "You're the first person I've encountered in 30 years who carries what you carry, and genuinely completely doesn't need anyone to know it. And I think I've been thinking about this since Thursday. I think that's actually the hardest thing. Not the skill, not the training, the not needing." Ryan was quiet for a moment. "It's not a virtue," Ryan said. "It's just where I ended up." "Maybe," Brooks said. "But it's where you ended up, and it matters." He straightened. "I want to offer you something. I run a veterans mentorship program through the gym, informal one afternoon a month for guys coming out of service who are having trouble with the transition. Some of them are in rough shape. Some of them just need to talk to someone who's been through it and is standing on the other side of it, okay?" He paused. "I'm not asking you to teach anything. Not asking you to demonstrate or instruct or perform. Just to show up. Be what you are. Let them see that someone can be what you were and also be this." He gestured not at the room specifically, but at Ryan in his general context. The ordinary clothes, the coffee cup, the 9-year-old with the notebook. Ryan looked at Emma, who was now in quiet conversation with a girl her approximate age, who had appeared from somewhere, and was apparently explaining with considerable hand gestures something about the bracket system. He thought about 2 men from his unit who had spent 6 years carrying something they didn't know who to say it to. I thought about what it cost to keep things inside and what it cost to let them out, and how most people never found the safe place to do the second thing. "1 afternoon a month," Ryan said. "That's all." He looked at the mat, at the kids moving on it, at Marcus running a teenager through a drill with patient repeated correction that looked nothing like the man who'd stood in this room telling a mechanic he didn't belong. People changed. When they had a reason to, and someone to change toward, they changed. "Okay," Ryan said. Brooks nodded once, the nod of a man who has gotten the answer he hoped for and is not going to oversell it. He stood, put a hand briefly on Ryan's shoulder, and went back to managing the event. Emma appeared at Ryan's elbow. "That girl knows the entire bracket structure," Emma reported. "She's been coming to this tournament for 3 years. Her older brother is in the 16 and over division." She wrote something. "I told her about the self-defense class I want to take, and she said this gym has one on Wednesday afternoons." Ryan looked at his daughter. "Wednesday afternoons," Emma said with the careful, neutral tone of someone presenting information and not asking for anything technically. "I heard you," Ryan said. She wrote something else, possibly victory imminent. The tournament ran until 1:15. Emma filled 4 pages of her notebook. She watched every bout with the same focused attention, and wrote after each one with the same deliberate speed, and at no point did she ask to leave early or show any sign of boredom, which confirmed what Ryan already knew about her, which was that she was interested in things genuinely interested, the way her mother had been genuinely interested in things, which was a quality rarer and more valuable than almost anything he could name. On the drive home, she was quiet for about 6 minutes, which was unusual. "Dad," she said. "Yeah." The man with the wrapped wrist, Derek. At the end when the little kids were getting their ribbons. He got down on one knee to give the ribbon to the smallest boy. He didn't hand it down, he got down to where the kid was. She looked at her notebook. "That was the best thing I saw today." Ryan drove. "It's easy to be good when everything's going well," Emma said in the tone she used for things she was working out. "The interesting part is when someone is good, when it costs them something, or when it's embarrassing, or when nobody's watching except a little kid who's too young to care whether you're important or not." Ryan looked at the road. He thought about a 9-year-old girl writing field notes at a martial arts tournament. He thought about all the things she understood that she had no formal reason to understand. "Where did you get that?" he said. She looked up from the notebook. "What?" "That idea. About being good when it costs something." She appeared to consider this. "I think I've just watched you," she said simply, and went back to her notes. The road went under them in the quiet way roads do. Ryan drove home. At 3:15, Marcus and Derek showed up at the shop as promised. Ryan had the bay door up and his tools out and the coffee maker running because some conversations went better with something to do with your hands. He spent the next 90 minutes showing Derek the mechanics of what he'd done with the wrist. Slowly. With full explanation. Not the tactical application, not how to hurt someone with it, but the structural logic. The anatomy involved. The precise point at which physics took over from technique, and why understanding that point was more important than any amount of speed or strength. Derek was a genuinely gifted student. He asked precise questions. He worked through each component without ego, willing to be corrected, willing to start over. Marcus watched and listened and asked fewer questions, but better ones. The questions of someone processing at a deeper level and only surfacing when they'd reached the edge of what they could work out alone. At 4:40, Ryan made them both coffee and they sat on the shop floor. No chairs, just the floor which seemed right, and talked. Not about techniques. About other things. About Derek's father's shop in Killeen. About the grain elevator where Gerald Hutchins had worked for 30 years. About what it felt like to be the biggest presence in a room for so long that you stopped knowing how to exist as anything else. Marcus said, "I called my mom this morning." Ryan waited. "Just to talk," Marcus said. I don't call enough. She never says that, but I know it's true." He turned his cup in his hands. "I told her I'd been thinking about her, that's all. She asked if I was okay and I said yeah, and she said good, she worried, and I said I know you do, Mom, I know." He stopped. She cried a little. She thought I didn't notice, but I noticed. Ryan said nothing. "I'm going to call her every week," Marcus said. "I've been saying I'm going to do that for 3 years. I'm going to actually do it." Derek looked at his brother. Not with the competitive sideways quality their dynamic usually had. With something quieter than that. Something that looked a lot like recognition. "Yeah," Derek said. "Me too." At 5:30, Ryan locked the shop and they left, and he stood in the empty bay for a moment before pulling the door down. He thought about the version of Thursday night that could have gone differently. The version where he'd let his temper make the decisions, or where Marcus and Derek had pushed further than they did, or where the evening had resolved itself in a way that left two men angrier and more certain of their worst qualities rather than slightly cracked open. He thought about the version where Rains had reached him before Calloway did. I thought about all the versions of the last 5 days that could have been worse. Then he stopped thinking about them because that was a habit that led nowhere useful, and he pulled the bay door down and locked it and drove home. Emma was in the backyard when he got there, sitting cross-legged on the ground beside her soccer ball with her notebook open on her knee. Writing something with the absorbed intensity of someone who is not going to be interrupted and knows it. Ryan sat on the porch steps. The yard was the good kind of quiet, active quiet, the kind that has life in it. Wind in the neighbor's oak tree. A dog somewhere down the street. The distant, compressed sound of a lawnmower doing a last pass before the season made lawnmowers unnecessary. Emma wrote for 3 more minutes, then looked up. "I figured out the thesis," she said. "For the water filtration project. For the water filtration project." She looked at her notebook. The hypothesis is about what gets removed and what stays. Like you filter the water to take out the things that shouldn't be there, but what you're actually doing is protecting what should be there. The clean part, the useful part. She paused. That's the whole point of a filter, not taking things out, protecting what's worth keeping. Ryan looked at his daughter. She looked at him. "Mrs. Patterson is going to like that," he said. Emma nodded with the satisfaction of someone who knows her work is good. "I know," she said. He watched her close the notebook. "I thought about filters, about the specific and effortful work of removing what shouldn't be there in order to protect what should. About a career built on exactly that, on going into places where the wrong things were operating and removing them so the right things could survive. About coming home and building a life that was itself a version of that same principle. Small, protected, worth keeping. About a porch light that stayed on. About notes folded under apple slices. About a smiley face drawn in Sharpie on a tool bag 12 years ago that he'd never once considered covering up. At 6:02 his main phone buzzed. A text from Carver. Harmon waved. Full cooperation in exchange for consideration on sentencing. He gave up 3 additional names. This goes higher than we thought, and it's going to take months to unwind. But the part that was pointed at you is over. Your name doesn't appear anywhere in what he's giving them. You're clean, Cole. Completely clean." Ryan read it once. He put the phone in his pocket. "Dad," Emma said. She was standing now, soccer ball at her feet, looking at him with the assessment. "Are you sure everything is okay?" He stood up from the porch steps. He looked at her, this specific, irreplaceable person, standing in his backyard in the October light, with her notebook and her hypothesis and her complete, uncomplicated faith in his ability to handle the things that needed handling. "Yeah," he said. "Everything is okay." She studied him for another moment with those eyes that missed nothing. Then she nodded once, the same nod she'd been giving him since she was 4 years old, and had decided that if he said something was fine, it was fine. And that was a form of trust he had never taken lightly and never would. "Okay," she said. "Can you pass me the ball?" He walked across the yard to where the soccer ball sat at her feet. He passed it. She stopped it cleanly and passed it back. They went back and forth like that in the quiet afternoon, while the light dropped and the temperature dropped with it, and the yard smelled like October and cut grass and the specific, irreplaceable smell of an ordinary evening at home. Later, after dinner, after Emma was in bed and the house was quiet, Ryan sat at the kitchen table with the last cup of coffee and looked at the drawing on the counter. Dad fixes everything. He didn't. I knew that better than anyone. He'd seen enough broken things to know that some stayed broken. Some wounds didn't close the way the body promised. Some men didn't come back from what they went into. Some betrayals left marks that good documentation and federal jurisdiction didn't erase. He didn't fix everything, but he was here. I was at the kitchen table at 8:47 on a Saturday night in Hargrove, Texas, with a cold cup of coffee and a drawing made by a 9-year-old girl who was asleep in the next room with absolute confidence that he would be there when she woke up. He'd fix the heater. He'd fix Gerald's transmission. He'd fix the light in Bay 3 that he'd been meaning to fix for 6 weeks. He'd made the calls that needed to be made and held the line that needed holding and kept the world the right size for one small, serious, perceptive person who deserved nothing less. That was the job. Not the one that had given him his clearances or his injuries or his classified history. This one. The one with the porch light and the spaghetti and the notes under the apple slices. The one that had no name and no medal and no debrief. The one he'd been built for and hadn't known it until he was already doing it. He got up, rinsed his cup, dried it, put it away. He checked the back door. He walked to the front of the house and checked the porch light. It was on. He stood there for a moment with his hand on the doorframe, looking out through the glass at the dark street. The quiet neighborhood. The ordinary and complete peace of a life that was against considerable odds and with significant effort, and at a cost he had paid without complaint exactly what it was supposed to be. He didn't need anyone to know what it had taken. He didn't need a room to know his name. He didn't need the world to understand the distance between who he had been and who he stood here being.